Chapter 268. The attack of the ninjas was originally a secret. Even he was the last to know about it. Then who was it that leaked the news? Let them all be wiped out, and none of them return. Also, what kind of existence was Yongjia village? Why did they always suffer heavy losses every time they dealt with this loyal prince? What was even worse was that the appearance of the ninjas couldn't be told to the outside world. In other words, whether these ninjas were all killed or not, he couldn't reason with the great Ming dynasty as an envoy of Japan. After arranging for Qi Shang to investigate the disappearance of the ninjas, Kimura Yoshida went straight to the Ministry of Rights in a palanquin. Today, the great Ming dynasty was still in its prosperous period. As for Japan, it was still a huge monster. But this didn't mean that they didn't dare to speak to the strong. On the other hand, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who stood behind Kimura Yoshida, belonged to the hardline faction. Perhaps it was because they grew up in Japan, they were used to being short-sighted. They were used to thinking that everything revolved around them. With this thought in mind, Kimura Yoshida was instructed before this trip. He must return to Princess Junko. For this purpose, he could even threaten the Great Ming dynasty. Under the policy of banning the sea, not long after the Great Ming dynasty was defeated by the Walla, the Great Ming dynasty was divided into two. He was confident that the Great Ming dynasty wouldn't be willing to offend them and treat them as enemies. In the Ministry of Rights, the chief official on duty today was Left Assistant Minister He Wenyuan. He became a scholar when he was young, and then he finally stepped on the path of Jinshi. He became one of the representatives of scholars and one of the supporters of Confucianism. He was still very principled. When He Wenyuan saw the arrogant Kimura Yoshida in the reception room and learned that this person actually asked the Great Ming dynasty to unconditionally release the previous envoy Aoki Yuki and return the Japanese merchants who were imprisoned in Yongjia village to them, He Wenyuan's face became very ugly. Emissary Mu, Emissary Green would committed a crime in the capital of my Great Ming, almost injuring an important official of my Great Ming. The implications of this matter are too great for me to say anything about, so it's best not to speak of it. As for your second request, I don't know what's going on with that Japanese businessman you mentioned. However, as far as I know, there aren't any merchants imprisoned in Yang Manor. I'm very suspicious of the reliability and veracity of your source of information. Faced with the aggressive Kimura Yoshida, He Wenyuan retorted. Putting aside the fact that Yang Qindong's writing style was excellent, He Wenyuan admired it. With Dong Shuai's reputation alone, why would he need to confine anyone? Not to mention that he was a merchant from another race. If it had been someone else, it would have been possible. After all, businessmen were rich, and they could always get some benefits by capturing them. But does Dong Shuai lack money? Baka, are you doubting my words? Do you not believe me? Being blocked by He Wenyuan's words, Kimura Yoshida was naturally very angry, and his tone naturally carried the fire of anger. This isn't a matter of whether I believe you or not. This official is only speaking based on the facts. Since you don't have any evidence, forgive this official for being unable to believe your words. Also, please pay attention to your wording. As far as I know, the word baka doesn't mean anything good, right? He Wenyuan didn't understand Japanese, but looking at Kimura Yoshida's expression, he guessed that it shouldn't be something good. So he reminded him. Here, it has to be said that the ancient people of China were broad-minded. They always regarded themselves as a great country, and in accordance with the principle of broad-mindedness, they rarely did anything aggressive. When they were strong, their opponents would often submit to them and pay tribute, and the dirty things they had done before would be forgotten. And once China entered a period of weakness, those small countries that once seemed obedient would jump out one by one, wanting to get a share of the benefits. Under the cycle, the country's territory was getting smaller and smaller, and the feeling it gave people was getting more and more kind. Because Kimura Yoshida understood this, he wasn't afraid of the Great Ming. First, he would scare them to achieve his goal. If the tough method didn't work, he would bow his head and admit his mistake, and there would be no danger. How could a country that forbade the sea pose a threat to Japan, which was surrounded by the sea? With this in mind, Kimura Yoshida naturally didn't take He Wenyuan's reminder seriously. On the contrary, his eyes narrowed, and a cold light flashed in them. Assistant Minister this ambassador received the order of our Emperor and General Ashikaga Yoshimasa to bring the Japanese businesswoman back to Japan. In order to achieve this goal, we have prepared everything. Do you know everything? If you refuse to hand her over, it will be a contempt to our country. And this is something that our Emperor and General can't allow. If you must do this, then we don't mind gathering thousands of warships. When the time comes, if the army really presses on the border, I don't know if the newly ascended emperor can withstand it. The more Kimura Yoshida spoke, the more ruthless and murderous Kimura Yoshida's voice became. When Yuan heard these words, he trembled all over. Scholars rely on their knowledge and mouth, and they are not proficient in things like war. Otherwise, the ancient people wouldn't have left behind a famous saying. When a scholar meets a soldier, it's impossible to reason with him. Kimura Yoshida suddenly said that they might declare war on the Great Ming because of this matter, which made Yuan realize the importance of this matter. At this moment, this matter was not something he could handle. After a moment of hesitation, he replied, "All right, I understand your request. I will report this matter to our emperor. At the very least, I'll have to ask the envoy to wait for 2 days to see what the outcome will be." Seeing that the threat seemed to be effective, Kimura Yoshida nodded happily. "All right, this envoy will wait for news from your country. But please hurry. After all, this envoy has a good temper, but it doesn't mean that our emperor and general have the same temper." The meeting was over. Kimura Yoshida left the Ministry of Rights Yamen with a smug look on his face. Soon, Yuan's sedan also left the Yamen and went straight to Minister Hu Xiao's residence. Yuan's sudden visit made Hu Xiao, who was resting at home, change into an official's robe and receive the guest in the main hall. Needless to say, Hu Xiao could feel that something big must have happened for the left assistant minister to come in such a hurry. Sure enough, when Yuan explained his meeting with Kimura Yoshida in detail, Hu Xiao's eyes wrinkled. According to the ancestral teachings of the Great Ming, that is, the great emperor Yongle Zhuди, the great emperor of the Ming dynasty, personally led his troops on a 10,000-li expedition to sweep away the Desert Empress for the second time and return to the imperial court in Beijing. Our dynasty's national power is supreme, it surpasses the ancient times. It controls the north, invades the west, the south, the west, and the barbarians of the west. These words were, no marriage, no reparations, no ceding of land, and no tribute. There was also the meaning of the emperor guarding the country and the emperor dying for the country. It was just that the Great Ming was now divided into two and had just fought a great battle with the Walla. It could be said that the Great Ming had suffered heavy losses, and the elites were all dead. Although the military recruitment had now begun, it would take time to recover to its peak. At this moment, if Japan attacked the border at sea, it would undoubtedly be a headache for the Daizong Emperor. We can't fight. Hu Xiao hesitated for a moment before giving an answer that was close to the bottom line. This answer was not different from Yuan's. He also did not want to have any friction with Japan. If he backed down, he would have to agree to the other party's demands and conditions. Since this matter involved the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, he was powerless to do anything about it. Therefore, he explained, "Minister, no matter what, since this matter has happened, we should first report it to the Emperor and inform the Duke of Loyalty and Courage." In the end, this was Yuan's real intention. Using the opportunity of reporting to the Emperor, he expressed a certain amount of goodwill to Yang Qindong. Naturally, this favor would not be small. That's right. Hu Xiao had been an official for many years, so how could he not understand? He immediately understood and nodded with a smile. "I will go to the palace to meet the Emperor and send someone to inform the Duke of Loyalty. Minister please go back first. The Ministry of Rights still needs someone to be on duty." "Yes, Minister." Since he had sent out his goodwill, Yuan naturally should also leave. After the two of them greeted each other, they went their separate ways. Imperial Palace Main Hall. Hu Xiao was standing in front of the Daizong Emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and recounted everything that Yuan had reported. After he finished speaking, he quickly closed his mouth. The Emperor needed time to think, and as an official, he only needed to report the matter. As for how to deal with it, it would be up to the emperor to decide. How dare you? After listening to Hu Zhao's explanation, Zhu Qiu immediately slammed the dragon table angrily, his chest heaving up and down violently. It was obvious that he was extremely angry at this moment. No matter what, the blood of the Zhu family still flowed in his body, so he still had some courage. When the Great Ming Dynasty was at its peak, Japan, modern-day Japan, was one of the Great Ming Dynasty's vassal states, and also one of the non-conquering states. When were they not obedient children in front of the Great Ming Dynasty? Only a few years had passed, so how could they have the courage to clamor? At this moment, Zhu Qiu really wanted to lift the ban on the sea in anger. He believed that with the Great Ming Dynasty's national strength, they would be able to become one of the overlords of the sea again in a few years. At that time, Japan would always be under the attack of the Great Ming Dynasty. However, this thought was just a moment of anger, and he quickly calmed his anger. It was not because of anything else, but because the new army had just been established, the firearms battalion had been rebuilt, and new firearms were also being developed. All of these required a lot of manpower and material resources. As a result, he did not have the ability to do other things. Chapter 269. Your Majesty, please calm down. In my humble opinion, since this matter involves the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, let him handle it. Chief Steward Jin Ing, who was standing to the side, saw Zhu Qiu's weakness under his anger. He quickly gave Zhu Qiu a way out of the situation. When Hu Xiao heard that the matter was to be handled by Yang Chendong, he immediately understood what Jin Ing meant. He wanted to speak up to stop him, but Zhu Qiu had already spoken. That's right. Since this matter involves the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, let him handle it first. Zhu Qiu knew that this was a way out of the situation. He immediately took advantage of the situation and pushed the troublesome matter out of the way. Let Yang Chendong handle it. If he was weak, then his title as the God of War would become a joke. When it spread throughout the world, it would be a serious blow to his reputation. As the emperor, he could be happy and take the initiative. On the other hand, if he wanted to be tough, then the matter would be left to him. When the time came, as the emperor, he only needed to say that the national treasury was empty. At that time, Yang Chendong would be the one who was in a difficult position, not him. Zhu Qiu was very adept at using the tactic of retreating in order to advance. While Jin Ing praised the emperor's wisdom, he sneered in his heart. He wanted to see how Yang Chendong would solve this problem this time. When he had defeated Walla, he had relied on advanced firearms. But Japan was far away at sea. Without a large warship, what could he do? How could he create a storm with one turn of the hand? Jin Ing was even prepared to immediately spread Kimura Yoshida's words and announce to the public that the emperor had given the authority to deal with this matter to Zhong Dangong. He wanted to use this opportunity to make things difficult for this Zhong Dangong who didn't put him in his eyes. If Yang Chendong did not handle it well and lost the support of the people, he would have countless ways and excuses to punish him. In this way, all of Yang Chendong's assets would be flooded into the national treasury. As the one who carried out the order, he would certainly benefit greatly from it. Under Jin Ying's suggestion and Zhu Qiu's tacit approval, Kimura Yoshida's incident quickly began to spread. It didn't take long for the cause and effect of the incident to spread all over the streets. In the Yang Chendong's manor 15 li south of the city, Yang Chendong also saw the emperor's decree. There seemed to be a tacit understanding between them. Yang Chendong was not willing to see Zhu Qiu, and Zhu Qiu did not seem to want to see Yang Chendong either. If there was anything, the eunuchs would come and pass on the edict. Are you trying to make things difficult for me by leaving this matter to me? Looking at the golden imperial edict on the desk, Yang Chendong smiled faintly. In the study, Junko had already dressed up and was standing beside Yang Chendong. When she came back last night, she caught a cold. Later, she fell asleep in Yang Chendong's warm embrace. When she opened her eyes again, she found that she was still in Yang Chendong's arms. With a red face, Junko struggled to get up, and then thanked Yang Chendong. Seeing that you caught a cold and hid in my arms, I didn't call you. Come, here is a bowl of ginger soup. It's still hot, drink it to get rid of the cold. Yang Qindong saw Junko struggling to get up, laughed, and reached out to hug her again. Then a bowl of hot ginger soup was delivered to Junko's mouth. From childhood to adulthood, although it could be said that Junko was used to having her clothes stretched out and food served, she was still not used to being served like this by a big man. But considering that this was Dong Shuai's kindness, she couldn't refuse. So, she reached out and drank the whole bowl of ginger soup. After doing this, Junko remembered that she had just woken up, so her makeup must be messy. So, she quickly went out to clean up. When she came back, before she could say a few words to Yang Qindong, Zhu Qiu's imperial decree arrived. Junko was a very smart girl. The moment she saw the imperial decree, she thought of a lot of things. When she thought of the things she had heard before, she said with a surprised face, "Your great Ming emperor is so powerful. He clearly wants to push the trouble to you. Don't say that about our emperor." Yang Qindong smiled and reached out to touch Junko's nose, and then said, "How can I not know what the emperor means? If he didn't do this, I would have intervened. Is it because of me?" Junko looked at Yang Qindong curiously. Taking the initiative to attract trouble, she really couldn't think of why the smart Dong Shuai would make such a choice. If there must be a reason, then it was probably because of her. After all, Kimura Yoshida wanted her, didn't he? Yes and no. Yang Qindong gave an ambiguous answer. Few people who were born in China in the future had a good impression of Japan. Most of them even had a trace of resentment in their hearts, so they were called angry youths. Unfortunately, Yang Dong in his previous life was one of them. In this life, he became Yang Qindong, but this kind of thinking didn't change at all. Yang Qindong had both love and hate for this island country. What he hated was what they had done to China, and what he loved was their positive spirit. Perhaps because of the geographical location, they clearly knew that it was not easy to live. If they wanted to live a better life, they could only obtain resources through external expansion. The environment limited their thinking, so they had to do something to the nearby China. This was something that even Yang Qindong couldn't change. And if he didn't want to see the scene of killing each other, perhaps there was a good way, that was assimilation, or a more vulgar way, annexation. As long as he annexed Japan and took it as his own, then his own people wouldn't fight with each other. In order to achieve this goal, Kimura Yoshida had to pass this hurdle, and if he used it well, he could have a legitimate reason and excuse to take the initiative to attack. This was the fundamental idea of Yang Qindong to intervene in this matter. But Junko must have thought that it was because of her, so Yang Qindong didn't need to explain anything. He gave a yes and no, but in Junko's ears, it made her very grateful. She naturally didn't know the ambition of the man in front of her. She simply thought that he was looking for trouble to protect her. At this moment, her love for Yang Qindong in her heart increased. A man who could take on such a big thing for her, even risking his life to save her, such a man was worthy of her life. "Come, arrange something. I want to see Kimura Yoshida." Yang Qindong's voice sounded in the study, and soon the voice of Tiger's Mane came from outside. "Young master, we will arrange it." The news that Kimura Yoshida, an envoy of Japan, threatened to invade the great Ming dynasty spread like a whirlwind through the streets of the capital. For a time, everyone was talking about this matter. In the streets and alleys, there were always people in twos and threes talking about it. Perhaps because Japan was one of the vassal states of the great Ming dynasty, and because the capital was not near the sea, the people here didn't feel the trouble of Japan invading the sea, and there was no worry on their faces. They thought that it was nothing more than a small country that needed to be taught a lesson. How dare it provoke the great Ming dynasty? Because they were ignorant, they were fearless. Ordinary people knew too little about the outside world. What they knew was limited, so they were fearless. However, for some scholars and businessmen who had traveled far and wide, because they had seen and heard a lot, they would not be so relaxed. The Soaring Heaven restaurant had once been a rather famous restaurant in the capital. A group of noble scions had gathered here, and their sources of information were much wider than those of the common folk. It was precisely because of this that the discussion on this issue was particularly intense. In the hall, a tall and fat young man was expressing his opinion at this moment. Around him, There were about a dozen young masters or young master in brocade robes. Just from their clothes, one could tell that these people were either rich or noble. Speaking of me, Japan has always been paying tribute to the Ming dynasty and is one of the tributary states to the Great Ming dynasty. How dare they threaten the Great Ming dynasty? In the end, it's because someone stepped on their tail. As the saying goes, even a rabbit bites when cornered, let alone a sea country. This person's voice was clear and precise, and after he finished speaking, the crowd began to cheer. Brother Bai's words are extremely correct. Then, based on your words, as long as we don't push them too hard, Japan won't negotiate with us with such an attitude? There was no lack of flatterers in the crowd. On the surface, they were asking for advice, but in reality, they were praising. Haha, it can't be said to be completely correct. It's just the words of one side. Reality should be as such. As long as we can satisfy their demands and conditions, I presume that the situation can take a turn for the better at any time. The man called Brother Bai chuckled. His face flushed red with pride and excitement. Very good. You said it yourself that it's just the words of one side, and in reality it really isn't entirely correct. A voice suddenly rang out, resounding through the main hall of the immortal abode. This voice caused the smug Brother Bai's expression to turn extremely unsightly. Looking at the source of the voice, one could see a handsome young master in a white robe. When he saw who had spoken, Brother Bai's expression became even more gloomy. Wang Si, what do you mean by this? The person who had spoken was a student of the Yang Clan Academy, Wang Si. He was also the grandson of the current Minister of Appointments, Wang Ji. Studying in the Yang Clan Academy wasn't all about studying hard every day. There were days off. In Yang Qindong's words, this was called striking a balance between work and rest. At the same time, he also encouraged his students to delve deeper into life, into the midst of the common people, to experience the various facets of life and understand the needs of the common people. Chapter 270. It was precisely because of this that Wang Si didn't choose to eat at the immortal abode. Instead, he went to the Flying Sky restaurant, which was much lower in quality. He wanted to experience a different environment, and different people gave him different feelings. However, he didn't expect to hear Yu Yuanbi's boisterous speech here. When he heard something that angered him, he couldn't help but retort. According to Yu Yuanbi, someone had stepped on Japan's tail. Needless to say, that person was Yang Qindong. It was because Yang Qindong had taken in Junko that Kimura Yoshida was angered. This was something that many people knew. Since someone dared to publicly criticize his teacher, how could Wang Si just stand by and do nothing? Although he was a bit older than Yang Qindong, the sixth young master of the Yang Clan's academy had already conquered everyone's hearts with his calmness and knowledge that exceeded his age. As a result, the students all considered themselves students. How could a student allow others to slander their teacher? What's more, Yu Yuanbi had a grudge against Yang Qindong. Yu Yuanbi was Yu Xiong's elder brother, and also the grandson of the Minister of Justice, Yu Shirue. However, he was much stronger than Yu Xiong, who had failed to live up to expectations and been executed. He was already in charge of the Ministry of Justice in his 20s, and was a major sixth-rank official. His grandfather, Yu Shirue, had contributed greatly to this. However, Yu Yuanbi himself had also lived up to expectations. His performance was outstanding. They were both descendants of influential figures, and both were young masters. Their ideals were different, and their opinions were different. As soon as they met, the smell of gunpowder would naturally fill the air. Now, Yu Yuanbi was criticizing his teacher. It would be strange if Wang Si could just swallow this anger. When Yu Yuanbi saw Wang Si's accusation, his face became very ugly at first, but soon returned to normal. He walked over with a smile and said, "I was wondering who it was. It turns out to be our editor Wang Si." Wang Si's previous position was Hanlin Academy editor, a 7th-level official position. "Oh, by the way, I heard that you have quit long ago. Now you are a student. Haha, you are really promising. If I remember correctly, you are only 1 year younger than me. Why are you getting worse and worse as you live? Why are you still so young?" Yu Yuanbi's sarcastic words fell into Wang Si's ears. His expression didn't change. After studying in the Yang clan's academy for several months, he had learned 70% of how to maintain one's temper. He knew when to get angry, and when to do so would only make his opponent angry. Therefore, he didn't pay attention to Yu Yuanbi's words. Instead, he corrected the topic and said, "Yu Yuanbi, this young master said that your analysis is wrong. Please don't change the topic." Seeing that Wang Si didn't fall for his trick and still didn't let go of his previous words, Yu Yuanbi's face darkened and said, "What? My mouth is on this young master's body. Do I need your permission to speak? As for you, you're no longer an official. Why don't you kneel when you see this young master?" Yu Yuanbi, don't be so smug. This young master is also a self-admitted scholar. According to the laws of the Great Ming Dynasty, I don't need to kneel when I see an official. Who do you think you are? How dare you ask me to kneel? Wang Si's expression was normal. He wouldn't be frightened by Yu Yuanbi's words. His grandfather was the current minister of the Ministry of Personnel. He was in charge of the affairs of the officials. What kind of officials hadn't he seen before? A minor major 6th rank official couldn't scare him. Yu Yuanbi, who was refuted by Wang Si, had an ugly expression on his face. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that the young masters who followed him were looking at him as if he was a joke. He felt that they were right. He was just like a clown. Yu Yuanbi, who cared a lot about his face, felt that if he didn't do something, he would be seen through in the future. He thought about how his grandfather was the minister of the Ministry of Justice. A while ago, his third brother, Yu Xiong, was executed for causing trouble. This made him extremely angry. If he lost face here today, who knew how angry his grandfather would be when he found out? Yu Yuanbi suddenly became angry. He was still taller than Wang Si. He clenched his fists and approached him step by step. Wang Si, we've always minded our own business. Get out of here right now, and I'll pretend that you were never here. Impossible. Unless you admit your mistake and apologize to the Duke of Loyalty, I won't leave. I'll even announce your matter to the world and let everyone judge what you said wrong. Wang Si noticed Yu Yuanbi's angry expression, but he wasn't afraid at all. He didn't waste his time in the Yang family academy. He ran and trained his body every day, so he had a stronger physique than the average young master. He wasn't afraid of Yu Yuanbi, who was also a young master. Admit your mistake? Wang Si, I realize that after not seeing you for a few months, you haven't grown in other aspects, but your smarts have improved. All right, then I'll show you which one is bigger, an apology or a fist. Yu Yuanbi attacked as he spoke. He swung his right fist at Wang Si. Although the students of the academy didn't have high-intensity training like Lung Feng, their bodies were stronger than ordinary people. Wang Si could have jumped to avoid this punch that wasn't very fast and didn't have much strength behind it. However, he didn't do so. On the contrary, he stood there motionless as if he was scared silly. He allowed the fist to land on his chest with a bang. After the punch landed, Wang Si's body trembled involuntarily and he took half a step back. Yu Yuanbi actually took the initiative to attack first. This scene shocked the other young masters and young master who were watching the show. They didn't have the background of these two people. Whether it was the minister of the Ministry of Appointments or the minister of the Ministry of Justice, they weren't people they could offend. For a moment, they stood there, not knowing what to do. They didn't dare to pull him back or reach out to help. Wang Si took half a step back from the punch, but there was no sign of pain on his face. On the contrary, he said calmly, "Everyone saw it. He was the one who made the first move. Since that's the case, don't blame me for being impolite." After he finished speaking, Wang Si, who had just taken half a step back, suddenly took half a step forward. Using the momentum of this half step, he stretched out his right arm and his entire right shoulder at the same time. Wang Si rotated his waist slightly. According to his usual training, Wang Si injected all the strength in his body into his right shoulder. Then, he punched out and hit Yu Yuanbi's body that hadn't retreated in time. One used brute force while the other used skill and the strength of his entire body. Both punched out, but it was obvious who had the upper hand. With just one punch, Yu Yuanbi couldn't help but stagger and fall back as if he had lost his balance. Wang Si, who didn't show mercy, was excited when he saw that his punch was effective. He flew up and followed up, throwing out 2 more punches. One of the punches hit Yu Yuanbi's nose. Immediately, the sound of bone breaking rang out, followed by blood flowing out. This punch hurt Yu Yuanbi so much that tears flowed out. When he reached out and touched his nose and felt blood, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Ah! Murder, murder!" He was no match for Wang Si at all. After taking 3 punches in a row, Yu Yuanbi could only keep running away. As he ran, he shouted at the young master and young masters who were watching the show, "Are you just going to watch like this? If I'm beaten to death here, all of you will be sued. Don't you know that?" Only then did everyone's attention return to the present with this shout. At that moment, everyone's expression changed drastically. They began to surround Wang Si. From the looks of it, they clearly wanted to stop him and make him stop. But how could Wang Si, who was in the mood to fight, stop so easily? After a few punches, he found that the simple fighting skills he learned in the Yang Academy were so effective. Wang Si wouldn't be polite. He sighed in his heart that he was so powerful. Seeing that others wanted to stop him, he immediately threw out a punch at them without caring about anything else. These people wanted to stop him. It was clear that they were in cahoots with Yu Yuanbi. It was not a pity to beat such people. Thump! After a few more punches, 2 of the young masters who came to stop the fight fell down. The others saw that Wang Si was crazy. They were afraid that he would kill someone, so they didn't care about others and rushed up. In an instant, they surrounded Wang Si tightly. Then, they hugged his legs, grabbed his hands, and held his waist. Wang Si, who was like a tiger who couldn't resist a pack of wolves, was quickly restrained. Yu Yuanbi, who had run to the entrance of the Fei Tian restaurant, saw that Wang Si was restrained and breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, he happened to see the soldiers of the warden's office patrolling on the street. He immediately shouted, "Help! Someone is killing here!" In the courtyard of the Japanese diplomatic mission in the capital, Yang Chendong appeared here under the protection of a group of guards wearing the signature camouflage uniform. Kimura Yoshida had been notified a long time ago. He also wanted to meet the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty, who defeated the Walla's army and protected Junko. At the same time, he also made the previous ambassador, Aoda Yuki, stay in the prison of the Great Ming Dynasty, so he waited here for a long time. When the courtyard door opened, Kimura Yoshida didn't go out to greet Yang Chendong. He wanted to show Yang Chendong his power and let him know that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. That way, he could take more initiative in the following conversation. The courtyard door opened, but he didn't see Kimura Yoshida coming out to greet him. Yang Chendong, who was in the luxurious carriage, didn't get out. Instead, he said to Tiger's Mane outside the carriage in a very cold voice, "They are so arrogant. I'm here, but they don't know how to come out to greet me. Since they are so rude, then I'll tear down the door. I'd like to see how long they can last." "Yes," Tiger's Mane answered excitedly. Then he said to Lung Feng beside him, "Tear down the door. If they don't come out, then tear down the courtyard." Chapter 271. Lung Feng and his brothers were all young people, and they were not afraid of making a big deal out of it. Now that they had received orders from the 6th young master, how could they be courteous? Immediately, their eyes lit up as they took out their military knives and began to tear down the door. Very soon, the sound of clanking could be heard. In the courtyard, Kimura Yoshida was still sitting in the main hall. Beside him stood the leader of the guards, Ikigami, and a group of Japanese samurai. The purpose of this battle was to intimidate Yang Chendong. It was said that this loyal duke of the Great Ming Dynasty had just turned 20 years old. What kind of courage could such a young man have? As for defeating the Walla's army, it was the work of the mercenaries. This was a well-known fact. A person like him should have been scared to death when he saw such a battle. While Kimura Yoshida was still imagining what would happen to this young, brave, loyal guild member, a samurai suddenly rushed in with a gloomy face. "Not good. Not good. They are tearing down the door." "What do you mean by tearing down the gate? Who are they?" Kimura Yoshida was stunned when he heard the news, but soon he understood what was going on. When he heard that the other party was tearing down the gate, his anger couldn't be stopped. The gate was equivalent to a person's face. If it was really torn down, it was no different from a slap in the face. He knew that this bold and loyal princess had a temper, but he didn't expect her to be so bad-tempered. She didn't even meet him, and she gave him such a big gift. Kimura Yoshida, who had fainted, didn't feel good. He sat there and didn't make any sound, until Ikigami reminded him. Kimura-kun, we can't let them tear down the gate. If that's the case, we will lose face. Yes, go and stop them. If it doesn't work, we can use force to stop them. Kimura Yoshida, who was reminded by Ikigami, quickly regained his senses and ordered Ikigami. After receiving the order, Ikigami immediately rushed to the gate of the courtyard with more than 10 samurai. At this time, at the gate, more than half of the gate had been torn down. There were also many people of the Great Ming Dynasty who were standing here to watch the show. Ever since Jin Ing deliberately released the news, many people had gathered outside the Japanese diplomatic mission's compound. They wanted to see how their country's god of war would resolve this matter. Was he really going to lower his head, or was he going to be as domineering as before? Now, it seemed that he had made the right decision to come. Although the loyal duke was young, he was indeed hot-blooded. He tore down the door without saying a word. This was even more satisfying than watching a show. And during the process of removing the gate, who knows how many people were cheering? They were cheering for the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. They clapped their hands to express their satisfaction. What are you doing? Do you know where this is? How dare you cause trouble here? Arrest them all. Qi Shang finally appeared. When he saw that there was only a frame on the left of the door, his eyes burned with anger. With Qi Shang's shout, more than 10 warriors behind him rushed out, heading straight for the Lung Feng soldiers who were prying open the door with their bayonets. Take them down! Tiger's man had been paying attention to the movement at the door for a long time. When he saw that the Japanese warriors were about to make a move, it was exactly what he wanted. Without saying a word, he gave the order to Captain Chiu Vi, who was standing beside him. As the captain of the first guard by Yang Qindong's side, Chiu Vi had a calm personality and excellent skills. When he heard Tiger's man's order, there was no way he would be polite. He personally led 10 of his team members to meet the seemingly aggressive Japanese warriors. The guards and the Japanese warriors were not on the same level at all. To be able to enter the guards and be responsible for the safety of the 6th young master, which one of them was not the best of the best. They were just dealing with ordinary Japanese samurai. To put it in a slightly exaggerated way, even if they were to let the other party use only one hand, they could still easily win. As Chiu Vi led his brothers to make a move, the Japanese warriors who rushed out were quickly knocked down to the ground one by one. Their important joints were hit hard, making them fall to the ground and constantly wail. Not only the ordinary Japanese warriors, but even Qi Shang could not escape. The captain of the guards, who was taken care of by Chiu Vi, was punched in the throat by the captain of the guards. He felt that it was very difficult to swallow. Then he was punched in the face and blood splashed out. When he was knocked down to the ground by a sweeping kick, he was completely passive and had no power to fight back. The Japanese warriors were knocked down to the ground, and the door frame was completely removed. When Yang Qindong's luxurious carriage could enter, the carriage drove into the courtyard unscrupulously. Behind them, the cheers of countless people of the Great Ming Dynasty could be heard. In the courtyard, Kimura Yoshida came out of the main hall and saw the luxurious carriage in front of him. Not seeing Qi Shang and his warriors, Kimura Yoshida's face became very ugly. But he was stubborn. In order to maintain the dignity of Japan, he still stood in place and shouted loudly, "Who are you? Why don't you salute me when you see me?" Pa! As soon as he finished speaking, he was met with a raised whip. The whip hit him right in the middle, and a bloody wound appeared on Kimura Yoshida's body. It was Beta Persei who was driving the carriage. This whip was a lesson for Kimura Yoshida. What a joke! The 6th young master was in the carriage. How could he allow others to shout there? Ah! Murder, murder! Kimura Yoshida's painful and fierce cries came from the courtyard. It had to be said that cowards had the same virtue. Just like UNB, who was beaten before, he kept shouting when he was beaten, as if doing so could release his fear. You are the Japanese messenger, humph. You are really a disgrace to the Japanese. In the luxurious carriage, Yang Qindong's voice slowly came out. This voice was not very loud, but it sounded like thunder in Kimura Yoshida's ears. He remembered that this was not Japan, and he was not in his own courtyard. He was now a Japanese messenger, representing the face of Japan. At the thought of this, his expression changed again and again. What he did just now was really a disgrace to Japan. If this matter was spread back to Japan, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa would be the first to not spare him. As the representative of Japan's Bushido, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa hated timid and irresponsible people the most. As a trusted follower, he naturally knew what to do in the face of trouble. When he looked at the luxurious carriage in front of him, he couldn't help but stop. Then he tried his best to summon up his courage, raised his head and said, I am the envoy of Japan. You can't do this to me. Otherwise, it is contempt for Japan. I want to seriously protest. What did we do to you? Yang Qindong's energetic voice sounded from within the carriage when he heard the words that were clearly threatening in appearance but weak in heart. This was Japan. When facing the weak, they were condescending. In the face of the strong, they finally knew how to say the word of protest. Some people were like this. If they didn't feel pain, they wouldn't know how powerful you were, and they wouldn't know what fear was. After being asked by Yang Qindong, Kimura Yoshida looked surprised. Thinking that he had just been whipped and the scene of Ikigami and other samurai being beaten to the ground, he said, You hurt the Japanese messenger and our samurai. Nonsense. Do you think that I, the Duke, will not let my guards beat him up? Don't you know that we have a saying, a good dog doesn't block the way? Yang Qindong's voice came out of the carriage again. Being called a dog, Kimura Yoshida's face was of course not good. However, the situation was beyond his control. If he spoke rudely now, he wouldn't be able to escape from being beaten. As the saying goes, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. He decided to endure. A gentleman's revenge is a dish best served cold. That's enough, Mr. Zhongdan. Since you are here to negotiate, shouldn't you meet with me now? Of course, I want to see what you have to say. The curtain of the carriage was suddenly opened from the inside, and Yang Qindong appeared in front of Kimura Yoshida, dressed in a green robe. This was the first time the two had met. Kimura Yoshida had the common characteristics of Japan. He was very short and looked a little wretched. Compared to the tall and handsome Yang Qindong, in terms of appearance, the difference between the two was more than one grade. Not to mention, Kimura Yoshida was already a middle-aged man. In comparison, Yang Qindong was too young, even a little too young. Yang Qindong finally appeared. He jumped down from the carriage and landed in front of Kimura Yoshida. When he saw that the other party was still looking at him from head to toe, he showed a trace of displeasure and said, What's wrong? Are you not going to salute me when you see me? Being stared at by Yang Qindong's murderous eyes and his powerful aura, Kimura Yoshida couldn't help but agree. Then, he said respectfully, The Japanese envoy greets Mr. Zhongdan of the great Ming dynasty. Raise your head, Yang Qindong said magnanimously, then flicked his sleeves and looked like a gentleman. And this scene was seen by the commoners who were watching from outside. The gate was opened, and the people could directly see what was happening in the courtyard from the street. When they saw the Japanese envoy hurriedly salute Dong Shuai when he saw him, they immediately felt happy. Some people even cheered directly. It was the cheers that woke Kimura Yoshida up. He instantly realized that he was the envoy, and now he represented Japan. How could he bow his head in front of Yang Qindong? Kimura Yoshida was angry that Yang Qindong had humiliated him. He immediately raised his head and looked at Yang Qindong with resentment. Chapter 272. However, at this time, Dong Shuai had already turned his head away. He glanced at the courtyard with interest as if nothing had happened just now. This made Kimura Yoshida have a feeling that he couldn't use his strength. However, he didn't think about why he would lower his head when Yang Chundong threatened him. This was because of his servile nature. When he was in Japan, there were too many powerful people who needed him to lower his head. This had become a habit. When Yang Chundong pressured him a little, his nature was exposed. Kimura Yoshida, who was dissatisfied, felt that he seemed to have fallen into a disadvantage from the beginning. At this moment, he decided to save some face. He wanted to threaten Yang Chundong enough in the following negotiations to let him know that Japan was now very strong enough to threaten the Ming dynasty. Loyal Duke. Kimura Yoshida raised his head and walked forward. He was about to say something, but at this time, Yang Chundong's voice sounded before him. Mr. Kimura, what do you think of the capital of the Ming dynasty? It's very good, very majestic, and very spectacular. There are also a lot of people. Kimura Yoshida didn't know how to get to the point. After hearing Yang Chundong's words, a thought came to his mind. First, he praised Yang Chundong. When he saw the loyal and just great Ming dynasty nodding and smiling, he suddenly changed his tone and said, "It's just that although the Ming dynasty had a large population and had vast lands and abundant resources, they lacked a trace of courage. Especially last year, an army of 500,000 was defeated by the Walla cavalry that only had a few tens of thousands." As he spoke, Kimura Yoshida shook his head as if he was lamenting for the Ming dynasty. However, Yang Chundong knew that he was rubbing salt on the wound. He was also telling Yang Chundong that the Ming dynasty's army's combat power was not good. If they really fought with the warriors of Japan, it was still unknown who would win and who would lose. Well, Mr. Kimura is right. The Ming dynasty did lose the battle last year. To Kimura Yoshida's surprise, Yang Chundong actually admitted it calmly. This was the truth. Even if Yang Chundong didn't want to admit it, he couldn't. Instead of beating around the bush, he might as well admit it so that the other party wouldn't have an excuse to attack him. Therefore, Yang Chundong's tone changed after he finished speaking. However, that battle wasn't fought by the Daizong Emperor, but by Ingzong. It was because of the chief eunuch Wang Zhen's mistake in commanding that our great Ming Empire's army was defeated. Because of this matter, our emperor has already learned from the painful experience and is now recruiting new troops, establishing firearms and artillery battalions. The strength of the army is increasing day by day. I think Kimura-san should have heard of this. I believe that it won't be long before these elite troops can return to the battlefield. At that time, anyone who wants to spy on our great Ming dynasty will become a ghost under the blade of the sword. Yang Chundong spoke unhurriedly, as if he was repeating an extremely ordinary matter. Kimura Yoshida curled his lips in disdain. Of course, he heard that the great Ming Empire was training new troops, but he wasn't optimistic about it. It was difficult for an army without enough training to play a role on the battlefield, especially for new recruits who had never been to the battlefield. They couldn't make people feel the slightest fear. Therefore, he was not afraid of what Yang Chundong said. On the contrary, such a demonstration would only have the opposite effect. It would only prove that the current great Ming dynasty was extremely weak. Perhaps Japan could take this opportunity to enter and ask for benefits. Kimura Yoshida was still disdainfully pouting, but all of this changed because of Yang Chundong's next words. Soon his face became heavy. By the way, there is one thing that I forgot to tell Kimura-san. Our great Ming Empire has already established a friendly relationship with the sea mercenaries. If Japan really wants to send troops, I'm afraid that they will have to go through them first. As soon as the matter of the mercenaries was mentioned, Kimura Yoshida finally stopped being arrogant and looked very serious. If it was a month ago, Kimura Yoshida didn't care about the mercenaries. However, on the sea route from Japan to the Great Ming Dynasty, he happened to encounter a group of mercenaries on the sea. They were dressed in pure white military uniforms, and they used powerful artillery to suppress and stop the ship he was on. Not only that, but they also took away all the valuable things on the ship. In the face of all this, Kimura Yoshida and his subordinates could only stare blankly at each other. After witnessing the power of the enemy's powerful cannons, which could create huge waves when they entered the sea, they were really scared. This kind of firearm should not be owned by human beings. They knew that if they really wanted to fight back, They would only have one result, and that was to die in the sea. They were in the sea. They were robbed on the way, and it was done by the mercenaries. How could Kimura Yoshida forget this kind of thing? Now that Yang Chundong reminded him that if he wanted to attack the Great Ming Empire, he might have to become enemies with the mercenaries. The fear in his heart rose spontaneously. He didn't know why, but the only thing that flashed in his mind was the loud roar caused by the heavy artillery falling into the sea. Kimura Yoshida was stunned. Yang Chundong knew that his threat had worked. His arrangement of Lung Feng's robbery was even more effective. He was afraid that the opponent would be incomparably terrified. They should be well-behaved for a period of time, and wouldn't grumble in front of others. While Yang Chundong was still thinking about how perfect his plan was, outside the courtyard, an inconspicuous woodcutter came to Yang Wu, who was standing guard outside the courtyard, and whispered something to him. Yang Wu's expression changed. He walked past the cold front and came to Yang Chundong's side. "Young master, there's a small problem." When Yang Wu told Yang Chundong the news he just received, Yang Chundong's expression darkened, but he quickly returned to normal. When he turned to look at Kimura Yoshida, he said coldly, "Your wish to see me has been fulfilled. I've also given you the warning you should give. If you still want to continue doing wrong, I'll accompany you at any time. Mr. Kimura, you should also take care of yourself. Don't cause trouble for the master behind you." It seemed like a kind reminder, but it also seemed like a threat. After Yang Chundong finished speaking, he turned around and returned to the carriage. Everyone immediately left, leaving Kimura Yoshida with a clear view of their backs. It wasn't until a long time after Yang Chundong left that Kimura Yoshida came back to his senses. Recalling everything that happened, he was surprised to find that from the beginning to the end, it seemed that the initiative was in the hands of the other party, and he had been passive. Even the choice of war was forced by the other party. What about the peace talk? What about the promise of getting Junko from him? It seemed that everything was over before he had the time to mention it. After Yang Chundong and his group left the Japanese embassy, they went straight to the Ministry of Justice. The news reported by Yang Wu was released by the Security Bureau. Wang Si and Yu Yuanbi fought and were caught by the people of the Five Cities Warden's office. They were sent to the Supreme Court. After a simple interrogation, they were transferred to the Ministry of Justice and finally sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison. In such a short time, so many things happened, and the efficiency of the case was so fast that it was shocking. It would be strange if things were simple. Whether it was Wang Si or Yu Yuanbi, they both had the backing of a minister. But even so, they were sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison. It was obvious that someone wanted to take the opportunity to make trouble. He could even guess the person behind the scenes. It seems that the death of a grandson can't make some people stop. Do they have to force me to eradicate them all? Yang Chundong thought angrily. Some people didn't know what was good for them. Outside the carriage, Tiger's Mane's voice suddenly sounded. "Young master, Yang-san is here. Let him in the carriage." Hearing that, even the deputy director came in person, Yang Chundong felt a little relieved. Now that he could get first-hand information, he had more options to deal with the next situation. The horse carriage did not stop. Yang-san only lightly jumped and entered the horse carriage. "Greetings, young master. No need to be so polite. Tell me what you know." Yang Chundong waved his hand casually. Yang-san nodded and said, "Young master, the situation is like this. In Fei Tian restaurant, Yu Yuanbi said something unfavorable to the young master. He insinuated that the Japanese diplomatic mission was caused by the young master. Wang Si happened to hear this, and the two sides got into a quarrel. Yu Yuanbi took advantage of the fact that there were many of them and he was tall and strong, so he attacked first. Wang Si fought back in self-defense and beat Yu Yuanbi. But in the end, because he was outnumbered, he suffered a small loss. After that, the patrolling soldiers of the warden's office of the Five Cities happened to pass by. They took everyone away and sent them to the Supreme Court. After knowing their identities, the Supreme Court transferred the case to the Ministry of Justice. After Li Wenxiao judged the case, Wang Si was sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison. Yunb was sent to the Ministry of Justice's hospital for treatment because his injuries were too serious. This is Li Wenxiao's situation. As Yang San spoke, he passed a document to Yang Chendong. It recorded the basic information of Li Wenxiao, the official of the Ministry of Justice. It included his birth, his promotion history, his background information, and some of the mistakes he made. Since the incident with Yu Xiong, the Security Bureau had paid special attention to some of the officials in the Ministry of Justice, especially those close to Yu Shuriwe. Li Wenxiao was included in their sights. As an official, not only did he need to have knowledge, insight, and courage, he also needed someone to promote him and nurture him. With a good benefactor, anything an official did would be twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, Yang Chendong had long requested the Security Bureau to do their best to gather all the information they could about the officials they could get access to. Especially the background, it was absolutely not to be underestimated. Chapter 273. The information was placed in front of Yang Chendong, but before he could flip through it, Yang San continued, Su Yozhen also sent a message, asking if we need him to take action. Su Yozhen was no longer a 6th-grade official like last year, but a 3rd-grade official. With the support and control of Yang Chendong, he was on the rise. Now that he was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, he could naturally intervene in this matter. Him. Yang Chendong first glanced at Yang San with a puzzled expression, following which a plan began to rapidly form in his mind. He is really thoughtful. Since this is the case, I believe that he will need some things to establish himself after entering the Ministry of Justice. In that case, I will lend him a hand. How about this, you personally pass on a message to him and ask him to do this? Half an hour later, the entrance of the Ministry of Justice was filled with brave soldiers at this moment. The soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty who were responsible for the security of this place were nervously holding the spears or sabers in their hands, looking at the large luxurious carriage parked in front of them with vigilance. Such a large carriage with such specifications could be counted on one's fingers in the entire capital. But this was the only carriage with black rubber wheels. It had almost become a symbol of Yang Chendong. No matter where he appeared, it was difficult not to attract attention. When Yang Chendong appeared here, he was naturally recognized at the first moment. But it was precisely because of this that the soldiers in charge of the security of the government were particularly nervous. Anyone who was well informed knew that this luxurious carriage belonged to the East Marshal and the army god. When facing the Walla army, it was the army god who defeated them with his own strength. Not only did he kill the 2 younger brothers of the Walla leader, Yeshen, but he also made them suffer heavy losses. At the same time, he also saved more than 70,000 soldiers. Even now, there were still many newly recruited soldiers who were among the 70,000 soldiers. In the entire capital, countless people had set up a longevity tablet for the army god. When such a person came to the Ministry of Justice, how could these ordinary soldiers resist him? The soldiers guarding outside the door did not know why Yang Chendong came. The only thing they could do was to keep an eye on the carriage and send someone to inform the officials in the yamen. Fortunately, the carriage didn't seem to have any intention of moving forward after reaching this point. The war god didn't make things difficult for them, and all the soldiers breathed a sigh of relief. The atmosphere seemed to be slowly easing. All of this continued until an official walked out of the yamen. Judging from his official robes, he should be a 5th-rank official of the imperial court. As soon as this person appeared, he saw the luxurious carriage blocking the entrance of the yamen. His eyes were filled with anger and his hands involuntarily moved behind his back. He raised his head and puffed out his chest as he said, "Who are you? How could they block the entrance of the Ministry of Justice? Are you trying to rebel?" This accusation was not small at all. In ancient times, as long as it was related to rebellion, 9 generations of the family would be executed. This official said this in front of so many people. It was obvious that he wanted to put a huge accusation on Yang Chendong so that he would be careful with his words and actions. The only luxurious carriage in the capital was in front of them, but this official acted as if he didn't see it. Moreover, he immediately put a huge accusation on them. If he said that he came to solve the problem with good intentions, no one would believe him. As soon as the accusation of rebellion was mentioned, everyone's expression changed. Even Beta Persei, who was driving the carriage, had an unfriendly expression. He glared fiercely at the fifth-rank official in front of him. The other guards and Lung Feng who came with him also emitted a murderous aura. They looked as if they would tear this person into pieces at the slightest order. Ha ha ha! When the atmosphere reached its peak, laughter suddenly came from within the luxurious carriage. It was this laughter that made those Lung Feng members, who were unable to suppress their resentment, feel happy. Their murderous aura was invisible. Needless to say, the laughter naturally came from Yang Chendong. Accompanied by the laughter, the curtain of the carriage was lifted from the inside, revealing a handsome and young face. As soon as Yang Chendong appeared, he looked straight at the official from the Ministry of Justice and asked sternly, "This duke is here. You are just a little fifth-rank official. Don't you know that you should greet him with a salute?" Originally, when he saw Yang Chendong finally show his face, this fifth-rank official was about to stare at Yang Chendong with an eye for an eye. When he suddenly heard these words, he suddenly thought of something. Then his entire body trembled. Only then did he reluctantly cup his hands and salute. The Ministry of Justice's director, Li Wenxiao, greets the Duke of Loyalty. Yang Chendong was not only the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, but he had also held the position of General of Agile Cavalry. That was a second-rank military official position. According to the laws of the Great Ming Dynasty, when a low-rank official saw a high-rank official, he had to salute. Yang Chendong's use of this to suppress people was very suitable. Li Wenxiao lowered his head, and the momentum that he had accumulated couldn't help but dissipate. When the other soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty saw that their high-rank official was like this, they also knelt on the ground and greeted loudly, "Greetings, Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Yang Chendong acted as if he didn't see these people greeting him, and he only looked at Li Wenxiao with interest. People said that enemies would always meet. They never expected that as soon as they arrived at the Ministry of Justice's Yamen, they would meet the main character. This was quite interesting. He looked Li Wenxiao up and down with a playful look in his eyes. However, it was this kind of gaze that made Li Wenxiao feel uncomfortable. He didn't know why this bold Duke of Loyalty and Courage was staring at him like this. Could it be that there was something wrong with his clothes? Li Wenxiao couldn't help but look around and size himself up. He didn't find anything wrong. When he raised his head, he saw that Yang Chendong's gaze had a few more traces of coldness. It was a cold light. This kind of gaze was full of killing intent. After just a glance, Li Wenxiao didn't know why, but he actually felt his whole body turn cold. Although the weather had begun to warm up, he still felt his whole body tremble at this time. Li Wenxiao, who was frightened by this kind of gaze, wanted to turn around and leave. However, he knew that if he backed down now, then everything he had done before would be in vain. In order to win the high-rank official satisfaction, he could only endure. As long as he blocked Yang Chendong's anger, he would be able to truly enter the eyes of some officials. In order to encourage himself and to increase his courage, Li Wenxiao raised his head again and said, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage? I don't know why you didn't stay in the Yang family village, but instead came to the Ministry of Justice's Yamen. Do you know that this is an office? Your appearance has already affected the Ministry of Justice's official operations. If something happens because of this, can you bear the responsibility?" Li Wenxiao's words had a strong sense of righteousness, and the excuse he found was also appropriate. Just as he was feeling satisfied with his words, Yang Chendong had already replied, "Since you came to the Yamen, of course you came to complain. Don't tell me you came here to eat? Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha." Yang Chendong's laughter immediately attracted a round of laughter from the accompanying Lung Feng. This laughter made Li Wenxiao's words seem like a joke. Immediately, he was so embarrassed that his face was filled with anger. This was clearly a feeling of being looked down upon. Just as he was about to shout and treat it seriously, there was a sudden sound of footsteps behind him. Then, he heard someone say, "Left Assistant Minister Su Yozhen has arrived." When the voice sounded, Li Wenxiao's body shook. He hurriedly turned around and saw that one of the Shangguan officials, Su Yozhen, had appeared. He hurriedly bowed and said, Li Wenshao greets Lord Su. Well, you did well. As soon as Su Yozhen appeared, she gave Li Wenshao a verbal compliment. This sentence made Li Wenshao, who was originally furious, feel very comfortable. With the Shangguan officials supporting his actions, he wanted to see what this Duke of Loyalty could do to him next. Su Yozhen nodded at Li Wenshao with an expression of praise. At this moment, he also noticed Yang Chendong standing at the entrance. He immediately cupped his hands and bowed. So it is the Duke of Loyalty. Please forgive me for not coming out to greet you. But what is the Duke of Loyalty doing here? Moreover, he had so many servants with him. Could it be that you are dissatisfied with the Ministry of Justice? First, the greeting was followed by the questioning. Su Yozhen did things swiftly and decisively. He had the demeanor of a great master. When these words came out, the originally frightened soldiers felt very refreshed. The originally low morale seemed to have recovered by quite a bit. However, when Yang Chendong saw Su Yozhen appear, he was neither happy nor angry. No one could tell what he was thinking. He only looked coldly at Su Yozhen, as if he was pressuring him. However, Su Yozhen was a third-rank official of the imperial court. His wisdom and courage were far from what Li Wenshao, a fifth-rank official, could compare to. Facing this kind of gaze, he was not afraid at all. He still looked at him with a calm expression. The two people's gazes looked at each other in the air for a full 10 seconds. When no one was able to gain the upper hand, Yang Chendong said, Since I came to your Ministry of Justice, of course I have to do a case. I have a complaint here against an official. Please accept it, Lord Su. With a wave of his hand, a complaint appeared in his right hand. He handed it to Tiger's Mane, who was waiting on the side. Then he handed it to Su Yozhen. She reached out her hand and took the complaint paper. After casually glancing at it, Su Yozhen's expression changed. Then he inadvertently glanced at Li Wenshao. Then he lightly nodded and said, This official will accept the Duke of Loyalty's complaint. The Ministry of Justice will also enforce the law. We will definitely give the Duke of Loyalty a satisfactory explanation. Very good. I hope Lord Su can do as you say. Of course, if you wish to show favoritism, I don't mind submitting a memorial to the Emperor. At that time, it won't just be the defendant who is being investigated. Your Ministry of Justice will also be implicated. Ha ha ha, let's go. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, he turned around and left without a trace of reluctance. However, it seemed that he was blocked by Su Yozhen. Chapter 274. After Yang Chendong left, everyone looked at Su Yozhen in a completely different light. In the face of a military god, in the face of a duke, this Lord Su actually dared to use his own body to block the attack. Most importantly, he succeeded. If this matter were to spread, his reputation would probably be ruined. On the other hand, Su Yozhen did not appear to be complacent. Instead, he held the letter of complaint in his hand and directly said to his personal attendant, Prepare a sedan. Let's go to the U residence. The U residence was naturally the residence of the Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwe. In less than an hour, Su Yozhen had already appeared in the main hall of Minister Yu's residence where he received guests. Yu Shuriwe somewhat looked down on this subordinate of his. A year ago, this person was still a sixth-rank official. When he saw him, he had to bow from afar. However, in such a short period of time, he was only a step away from Yu Shuriwe. This kind of leap in promotion made Yu Shuriwe faintly worried. However, regardless of whether he wanted to see him or not, since he was here, he still had to invite him into the residence. Otherwise, if word got out, everyone would say that he was immature and did something wrong. In the main hall, Yu Shuriwe sat down. After the servants served tea, Yu Shuriwe said with a straight face, Lord Su, may I know the reason for your visit? If you want to talk about Bai Er's case, then forget it. As his relative, this official needs to avoid suspicion. Seeing Yu Shuriwe so serious and saying that he would not care about the fight between Yu Yuanbi and Wang Si, a trace of mockery flashed in his heart. If he really did not care, why would Li Wenshao stand up for him? Why would Yu Yuanbi lie in the medical hall, and Wuxia be imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison. He did not say anything in his heart. However, he didn't say anything. Some things were just like that. Everyone knew what was going on, but what they said wasn't what they thought. This was also one of the ways of being an official. Lord Yu, I'm not here because of the children's fight. Someone has filed a lawsuit against Li Wenxiao, an official of the Ministry of Justice. They say that he took bribes from the defendant and made several false and unjust cases. This is the complaint. Please have a look, Lord Yu. With a very respectful expression, Su Yozhen handed the complaint paper from Yang Qindong to Yu Shirui. She had thought that Su Yozhen was here to talk about her grandson's case. Although this case was not big and the details of the case were not serious, it still involved two ministers. Could be said that it was very important. It was reasonable for Su Yozhen to come here and say something bad about him. After all, everyone had the desire to improve themselves. However, when Yu Shirui heard that Li Wenxiao was involved in the case, her face turned serious. But what he did not expect was that something would happen now. Since this was the case, he naturally had to comfort his family properly. At the same time, he had to protect this Li Wenxiao. Even if he could not let him become an official, he had to ensure the quality of life of his family. In this way, not only would he prove to outsiders that he would not forget his roots, but he could also set an example for more people to be willing to work for him and be loyal to him. Even now, Yu Shirui still believed that the consequences of this matter were not serious. At most, he would lose a good general and just have to give out some money. But he did not know that Li Wenxiao's matter would be the fuse that would lead to his downfall. It was truly a case of everyone kicking a man who was down. In the depths of the imperial palace, in the main hall where acting patriarch Zhu Qiu worked. At this moment, he was listening to Chief Eunuch Jining report on two matters that had just occurred in the capital. It was worth mentioning that these two matters were closely related to the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, Yang Qindong. The first matter naturally referred to Yang Qindong's meeting with the Japanese envoy, Kimura Yoshida. Tearing down the gate of the diplomatic mission, forcing his way in, and whipping the envoy was something that had never happened in history. But Yang Qindong had done it, and it had to be said that he was extremely daring. Even Zhu Qiu was shocked when he heard about it. He wondered if this Duke of Loyalty and Courage was not afraid that the Japanese would fly into a rage out of humiliation and invade the Great Ming Sea. But no matter what he thought, Zhu Qiu had no intention of interfering. This was because the outcome of this matter seemed to be beneficial to him. If Yang Qindong's actions had frightened the Japanese emissaries and made them give up, then he would also have some peace and quiet. Others would also say that he had used the right people to do so. On the other hand, if Yang Qindong's audacity provoked the Japanese emissary and caused Japan to take actual action and start to violate the borders, then all the blame could be placed on Yang Qindong alone. This would greatly damage his reputation, and at the same time it would be the best excuse to deal with him. Presumably, at that time it might be time to deal with the threat. Zhu Qiu was happy to see such a thing happen. She wouldn't be criticized and attacked by others. She could also gather power in her own hands. On the contrary, he hoped that this Duke of Loyalty and Courage would be happy, because the more things he did, the more he would expose himself, and any mistake could become one of the ways to attack him. As the influence of the Yang family bank grew, more and more people saved money. At this moment, Zhu Qiu was jealous. If it were not for the fact that the new army was still being recruited and trained, the matter of Zhu Qizhen in the south had not been resolved, and the situation in Walla in the north had not been completely settled, he would have already made dealing with Yang Qindong his top priority. Regarding the first matter, Zhu Qiu didn't express any opinion. She simply watched as it developed. The second matter, Yang Qindong's submission of the complaint to the Ministry of Justice, made Zhu Qiu have to say something. Although this Yang Qindong is young, he is not reckless. We thought that he would take credit for his contributions and force his way into the Ministry of Justice's Yamen. If that's the case, then we cannot let this matter escalate. We will have to ask him for an explanation. Yes, Your Majesty is right. This Duke of Loyalty and Courage does things with some propriety. But the left assistant minister Su Yozhen was able to withstand his attack head-on and did not yield a single step. Moreover, he even made a trip to the Yu mansion to ask for Shangguan's advice. He is also a smart person, a capable official. Borrowing the emperor's words, Jining conveniently picked up some private goods and sent them over. Recently, Su Yozhen had given Jining a lot of benefits. He had given her banknotes and treasures. Jining had been served very well. After receiving so many benefits from others, Jining had to put in a few good words for them at the crucial moment to give the emperor extra credit. This was what Jining needed to do. As expected, once these words were said, Zhu Qiu nodded repeatedly and said, "Beloved official Su is indeed a talent. Most importantly, he has many grievances with the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. You can rest assured using this kind of person. How about this, you go back and observe him carefully. If he is reliable, let him do his job well. We will not treat him unfairly in the future." Su Yozhen had once caused trouble for Yang Qindong when Zhu Qizhen was still in power. First, he had impeached him, then he had recommended him. Everything he had done could be made public and no one could say anything about it. Even Yang Qindong did not seem to be able to retaliate against these methods. An official like this, who did not fear powerful officials and had his own methods, of course Zhu Qiu would like him. At least he knew that this person's existence could somewhat curb Yang Qindong's forceful momentum. This was enough for him to be of great use. Chapter 275. Originally, she had only wanted to help Su Yozhen put in a few good words to strengthen her position in the emperor's heart. She had not expected to receive such a promise. Jining was overjoyed. With this news, getting a few 100,000 taels of silver from Su Yozhen shouldn't be a problem. Delighted, Jining respectfully replied, "This subject will pass on your majesty's words to Lord Su. I'm sure that he will shed tears of gratitude and will wholeheartedly work for your majesty in the future." "Ah, good, good." Zhu Qiu also laughed heartily. But in his heart, he was somewhat looking forward to the next two things. He wanted to see what would happen when the two grandsons of the minister fought. He wanted to see what the Japanese would do. He also wanted to see what kind of wonderful performance Su Yozhen would have. The Wang residence. As the current Minister of Personnel, he was in charge of the promotion and evaluation of officials. Wang Zhi's residence had a majestic aura. But at this moment, in his study, Minister Wang's expression was rather unsightly. This was especially so when an official came to report that his most favored grandson, Wang Si, was currently suffering from hunger and cold in a dungeon. He was so angry that his beard trembled. As the Minister of Personnel for many years, he had personally promoted countless officials. If one were to say that it wasn't because of one's personal preference, no one would believe it even if one were to say it. It was precisely because of this that in the past few years, very few people in the capital had been able to escape his eyes and ears. There would always be some officials who would reveal information to him in the name of repaying a debt of gratitude, and this included people from all sorts of departments. Just as his grandson had started fighting with Yu Shiyue's grandson, the news had arrived. Wang Zhi did not care at first when this matter came out. It was just a child's quarrel. They would each be given 50 strikes and sent back to their respective residences to manage. At the very least, if he were the one in charge, this would definitely be the case. After all, he was the Minister of Personnel, and Yu Shiyue was the Minister of Punishments. They were both officials of the court and would see each other frequently. It was impossible for them to fall out over the matter of a child. But reality did not develop as he had expected. From the reports of the officials, Yu Yuanbi had gone to the hospital in the name of recuperating and was very comfortable. His grandson was locked up in a cold and damp dungeon. How could Wang Zhi not be angered by such an obvious way of dealing with the situation? However, due to his identity, it wasn't convenient for Wang Zhi to interfere. He could only watch the performance of the officials from the Ministry of Justice from afar. Fortunately, Yang Qindong soon made a move, which made Minister Wang feel relieved. Wang Si didn't acknowledge the wrong teacher. Although this gentleman's actual age was younger than his grandson's, it was still true that the one who reached the top was the teacher. He had thought that since Yang Chendong had made a move, his grandson would be fine. However, the result was not like this. On the contrary, this loyal duke of the Great Ming dynasty took a different approach and sent a complaint to the Ministry of Justice, Li Wenxiao, who had distorted the facts. At first, Wang Ji was puzzled by this outcome. However, after thinking about it carefully, he couldn't help but clap his hands in praise. This loyal duke was clearly going to use a ruthless method to cure Wang Si. Yes, with Yang Qindong's identity, he could naturally ask the Ministry of Justice for Wang Si. He could simply bail Wang Si out of the dungeon. However, if he did this, he would be at a disadvantage. Others would say that this was the result of suppressing people with power and couldn't truly convince the public. On the other hand, if he didn't mention Wang Si's matter and let him suffer a little, he would target the official in charge, Li Wenxiao. In this way, if he really overthrew Li Wenxiao, who would dare to deal with people and matters related to the loyal duke out of selfishness in the future? It was just letting his grandson suffer for a day or two more, but it would fundamentally prevent such things from happening. No matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. Even if Wang Si was his favorite grandson, Wang Ji still supported Yang Qindong's decision. Perhaps this was the difference in the structure. As the minister of a ministry, he didn't look at the small profits in front of him, but the long term. I just don't know if the Loyalty Duke's paper can overturn Li Wenxiao's case. No, I have to lend a helping hand. I also have to let others know that those who dare to bully my grandson, Wang Ji, should be prepared to be dealt with. Wang Ji muttered to himself. Then he called out to the outside, "Men!" In the Ministry of Justice's court. Although Li Wenxiao was still wearing his official robes, his face was pale. Even though the weather outside wasn't hot at all, and it was a bit cold in the morning and evening, beads of sweat flowed down from his forehead, splattering on the ground. Li Wenxiao, there are people suing you for corruption, accepting bribes, and creating many unjust, false, and wrong cases. You have to give an explanation. Su Yozhen sat high up in the court. As she spoke, she casually threw the paper in front of Li Wenxiao. From the moment he was brought to this torture court, Li Wenxiao had a bad feeling. Especially when he found out that Assistant Minister Su had personally gone to Minister Yu Shiyue's residence and still made such a decision. He knew that he had been abandoned, and that the matter would be difficult to resolve. The paper had been personally sent by the Loyalty Duke, who was at the peak of his power. The lawsuit had also been approved by his superior Minister of Justice Yu Shiyue. The person in charge of his trial was the second-in-command of the Ministry of Justice, Left Assistant Minister Su Yozhen. With such a weighty list before him, if he still held on to any hope, wouldn't he be deceiving himself and others? Wasn't this enough to wake him up and frighten him? When the paper floated in front of him and he looked at the details written on it, his sweat dripped down even faster. He had done many of these things very secretly. He didn't know why they were still dug up. However, after reading the complaint, he felt much more at ease. There was no other reason other than the fact that the things recorded on the paper were all recent, and the amount of corruption wasn't that huge. From the looks of it, it wasn't enough to smash him to death with a hammer. At most, he would be dismissed from his position. If things went well, he might even be able to keep his position as an official and rise again in the future. It was precisely because he saw these papers that Li Wenxiao was not as afraid as before. When he raised his head to look at the presiding judge, Su Yozhen, he actually had an honest expression as he said, "Lord Su, this official has indeed done some foolish things. After the incident, I deeply regret it. Please take into account this official's honest answers and cooperation, and forgive me." "Oh, so you've admitted to it?" Originally, Su Yozhen had been waiting to see Li Wenxiao cry out that he had been wronged. Then, he would show his swift and decisive side and let everyone see how the newly appointed left assistant minister dealt with the case and how ruthless his methods were. Of course, all of this was based on his trust in Yang Qindong. He knew that since this person had taken out these papers in front of everyone, he had to have enough evidence. But he never thought that Li Wenxiao would not only admit to everything, but also have such a positive attitude. This made him feel like he had punched cotton. A police officer's achievement was to find the culprit through clues. A judge's achievement was to use enough evidence to make the defendant admit to his crimes. However, if all the prisoners were to confess before he could do anything, then there would be no sense of accomplishment. At this moment, Su Yozhen felt this way. He had already seen the papers. If Li Wenxiao denied everything, then he could produce enough evidence to prove that he was right. He could also add a heavy punishment based on the other party's uncooperative behavior. On the other hand, if the other party admitted to everything and had a good attitude, then based on this it would be much more difficult to do anything to him. If Yu Shiyue sincerely protected him, then it was possible that he would be able to keep his position as an official. At this moment, Su Yozhen was a little disappointed. He even had a trace of doubt about Yang Qindong's ability. If the dignified Duke of Loyalty wanted to deal with someone, he shouldn't only produce this little bit of evidence. If that was the case, then it would be difficult for him. But he didn't think about it. Yang Qindong's security bureau had only been established for a short period of time, and there were so many officials to keep an eye on. A fifth-rank official in the Ministry of Justice was not the most important thing. To be able to find out about this, he had already put in a lot of effort. It was not impossible to find out about the past, but to do it in a short period of time would be very difficult. But he still did it, which was somewhat thought-provoking. Could it be that he was sure that there would be others who would do it? Li Wenxiao's cooperative behavior made it difficult for Su Yozhen, but on the surface, he still nodded with praise. Very good, your attitude is very cooperative. This official will record all of this. As for how to deal with it in the end, I still need to discuss with a few officials before the final decision can be made. For now, leave. Before the word hall could be said, a small official from the Ministry of Justice came to Su Yozhen's side and whispered a few words in his ear. At the same time, he took out a stack of papers from his sleeve and placed it on the table. Then he slowly retreated. Su Yozhen's gaze fell on the table in front of him and looked at the densely written papers. When he raised his head to look at Li Wenxiao, who was standing below the stage, he couldn't help but shake his head. Then he said, "Come, strip him of his official robes." Li Wenxiao, who was originally waiting to leave, suddenly saw Su Yozhen's attitude change. At the same time, his heart was beating like a drum as he shouted, "Official Su, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why? Seeing that you and I are colleagues, you can see for yourself." Su Yozhen pushed his hand on the table, and the thick papers fluttered in the air. When they landed on Li Wenxiao's feet, he lowered his head and looked up. Then he fell to the ground. Chapter 276. The contents of these papers were exactly what he had done a few years ago when he had just become an official. Perhaps it was because he had just entered the court, but his courage was still relatively big. He really dared to accept any kind of money and dared to do anything. Among them, he was even involved in 2 murder cases. At that time, it was precisely because he had accepted these bribes that he was able to give the money to his superiors and get promoted. He originally thought that after so many years, everyone would definitely not remember these things, but now they were all dug up. If he dared to admit it, not to mention his official position, it would be extremely difficult to keep his life. No, these things were not done by me. It has nothing to do with me. Seeing that he might die if he admitted it, Li Wenxiao of course would not let go. Li Wenxiao's expression finally changed, which also made Su Yozhen interested. These were all sent by the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhi, so there was no need to doubt the authenticity of these documents. In the face of ironclad evidence, Li Wenxiao still dared to deny it. It was finally time for Su Yozhen to show his skills. What? You don't want to admit it? Well then, we will interrogate you one by one. Come, prepare the torture equipment. Su Yozhen's angry voice resounded throughout the entire torture chamber. Although it was said that there was no need to torture a doctor, seeing that Li Wenxiao was about to die, Su Yozhen would not be polite. He was still waiting to use this case to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Justice. On the road to Yang Qindong, the convoy was caught by the security bureau. Then, Tiger's Mane told Yang Chendong in the carriage that Minister Wang Ji had taken action and obtained a large amount of evidence of Li Wenxiao's violation of the law. Young Master Minister Wang has taken action, and the Ministry of Justice has also released Wang Si. At this time, he is heading towards the Wang mansion. Tiger's Mane's voice clearly came out and entered the ears of Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the carriage with his eyes closed. I know. Yang Chendong answered very simply. Since Wang Ji had understood his intentions and had already made his move, then with the power of Wang Ji, the evidence he had gathered should be enough to keep an eye on Li Wenxiao. There was nothing for him to worry about. Previously, Yang Chendong knew that the information obtained from the Security Bureau was limited. He was afraid that he would not be able to kill Li Wenxiao with one blow. However, he still did it because he believed that Wang Ji would definitely take action after knowing what he had done. If he couldn't even see it, he wouldn't have been able to stay in the position of Minister of Personnel for more than 10 years. Since Wang Ji had made his move, Li Wenxiao would definitely die. This matter could be put aside for the time being. Some things needed to ferment for a period of time before they could be dealt with. Thinking about it that way, they would be able to reap greater rewards. Tiger's Mane, in the name of this young master, quickly inform Commander Gao Xiong that he can take action. Understood, young master. Tiger's Mane replied and rode away. Leaving Yang Chendong alone in the carriage, he muttered to himself, since you can't see the faces of some people clearly, then I'll give you a lesson. After experiencing inhumane treatment, Li Wenxiao also enjoyed many of the torture instruments that he was already familiar with. In the end, he spat out and confessed to many of the things written on the confession paper. When Su Yozhen received Li Wenxiao's confession, it was already the morning of the second day. Although he didn't sleep much this night, it seemed that everything was worth it to be able to achieve such a result. Of course, what made Su Yozhen even more excited was that after a night of torture, Li Wenxiao's psychological defenses had completely collapsed. He really said whatever he wanted to say, and in the end, he even accused many people, including the matter of him sending money to Minister of Justice Yu Shiyue. It added up to more than 20,000 taels of silver. According to the law of the Ming dynasty, which was the rule set by Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, if an official embezzled 60 taels of silver, he would be punished. One could imagine what the consequences of 20,000 taels of silver would be. This was equivalent to a huge bomb. Although Su Yozhen was a little excited, he didn't lose his head. After thinking it over, he didn't directly report it in an official document. Instead, he secretly told Jin Ying the matter. At the same time, he also had someone tell the secret agents of the Security Bureau to tell the Duke of Loyalty and Courage what he had done. Yang Chendong learned of Su Yozhen's gains and his choice at noon the next day. In the study, after Tiger's Mane reported Su Yozhen's actions, he tried to say, "Young master, why didn't Sir Su report this to the court? Why didn't he ask for permission before doing this? Should we give him a warning?" The warning Tiger's Mane spoke of was naturally to give Su Yozhen a good beating. This person had relied on the young master's help to get to where he was today. Now that he had a bit of power and merit, he dared to act first and report later. This trend could not be allowed to continue. He did the right thing. Faced with Tiger's Mane's advice, Yang Chendong smiled and shook his head. Sir Su told Jin Ying the news as soon as possible. That was the right thing to do. If it was delayed, it wouldn't be good. All right, let him handle this matter. The reason Yang Chendong trusted Su Yozhen so much and didn't blame him at all was because he had his own thoughts. Su Yozhen was one of the most powerful officials in history. Although his reputation wasn't good, his political skills and foresight were unquestionable. Since he had done this, he naturally had his own reasons. Furthermore, Yang Chendong could see that Su Yozhen had just entered the Ministry of Justice. If he removed Yu Shiyue now, based on his qualifications, he might not be able to take the position of minister. If he couldn't achieve this goal, then what good would it do to expose this matter? Rather than not being able to kill someone with one strike, it was better to wait a little longer and hang the blade high up. This could produce unexpected results. Moreover, once this matter was out, Yu Shiyue and the people behind him should be the ones having a headache. He only needed to wait and see how the other party would react. Yang Chendong understood Su Yozhen's actions. In the palace, after Jining received Su Yozhen, she was full of praise for his actions and methods. Good, very good. Sir Su, you did well. How about this? I will report this matter to the emperor. As for the specifics, you can go back and listen to the letter. She held Li Wenxiao's confession in her hand. Although Jining was angry, she was still very happy that Su Yozhen had reported to her first. This official will take his leave. Su Yozhen also knew that Jining probably had a lot of things to do now. He didn't stay any longer and even gave up the opportunity to flatter her alone. He left decisively. After Su Yozhen left, Jining thought for a moment and then went straight to Zhu Qiu's office hall. Zhu Qiu was still a part-time emperor. At least he was very diligent. Most of his time was spent dealing with political matters. When he saw Jining appear in front of him with a serious expression, he instinctively felt that something was wrong. He asked, "Beloved official Jin, did something happen?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Just now, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice came and gave me these." As she spoke, Jining respectfully presented the confession she had just received to Zhu Qiu. Then she explained, "This is Li Wenxiao's confession. If everything is true, I'm afraid that Sir Yu Shuriwei will no longer be able to hold the position of Minister of Justice." "Is that serious?" Zhu Qiu, who was flipping through the confession, heard this and his eyes widened. "Yes, it's that serious. It's because of this that Su Yozhen didn't say it publicly in court. Instead, he found me in private and told me this. Your Majesty, you see." Jining nodded and spoke very seriously. "Yu Shuriwei can't be touched now." Zhu Qiu shook his head decisively. His expression was very resolute. This was basically what Jining had expected. Yu Shuriwei could continue to hold the position of Minister of Justice because he had gained Zhu Qiu's trust. Although the current situation seemed to be much more stable, the external threat had not been completely eliminated. Before this, it was basically impossible to make the hearts of the people calm down. Thus, it was time to display the wisdom of the Daizong Emperor by choosing the type of officials and appointing the type of officials. Yu Shuriwei was one of the officials who supported Zhu Qiu's camp. If such a person was to be taken down, one could imagine how the hearts of the others would waver. Not to mention, this was not long after Yang Chendong had a conflict with him. If he were to be taken down, it would only increase the prestige of the Duke of Loyalty. From then on, there would be very few people who would dare to go against Yang Chendong. If this were to happen, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the emperor's authority. Zhu Qiu, who was gathering imperial power and preparing to make a big show of it, would definitely not allow such a thing to happen. "Yes, you can't touch him," Jining hurriedly repeated from the side. How long can Su Yozhen keep this matter under wraps? Although Zhu Qiu did not want to touch Yu Shuriwei, he knew that since the matter had already happened and was being watched by two important officials, Yang Chendong and Wang Ji, it was obviously impossible to pretend that nothing had happened. As the emperor, although he had many privileges, he still had to be fair. If he was too biased towards one side, not only would it not convince the public, it would also cause trouble. This, it's hard to say. Unless something big happens, I'm afraid that many people are keeping an eye on this case. Jining had a troubled expression on her face. He also knew that it was not the right time to touch Yu Shuriwei. However, whether it was Yang Chendong or Wang Ji who had provided evidence later, which one of them was easy to deal with. Jinying's answer allowed Zhu Qiu to see a glimmer of hope. Very good. Then come up with something else to attract everyone's attention. Didn't the Duke of Loyalty beat up the Japanese envoys yesterday? Because of this, there were even censors who wrote impeachment memorials, but I suppressed them all. Now, contact more censors and have them impeach the Duke of Loyalty and divert everyone's attention. Also, privately inform Yu Shuriwei. He will know how to suppress this matter. Chapter 277. With Yu Shuriwei's status as the Minister of the Ministry of Justice, even if Li Wenxiao's case was handled by the Ministry of Justice, he should know how to minimize the impact and extricate himself from it without needing anyone to tell him what to do. As long as Li Wenxiao went back on his words and refused to admit to what he had said about Yu Shiyue, the matter could be reduced to a small matter. At the very least, the Minister of Justice could be saved. Your Majesty is wise. Jining hadn't thought of a better idea, but when she heard Zhu Qiyu's suggestion, her eyes immediately lit up. Previously, Zhu Qiyu didn't want to touch Yang Qindong because he wanted to see how the Japanese envoy would react before making a decision. However, now that Yu Shiyue's incident had happened, all of his plans were about to be disrupted. Using this matter to divert everyone's attention was a feasible move. Very good. Official Jean, go ahead and do it. You can contact more people and say that it's our will. Zhu Qiyu rubbed his forehead with a pained expression. Using officials to deal with officials was one of the most common tactics used by the imperial power. After all, there were only so many people at the top. If one wanted to rise to the top, not only did they need to have ability and intelligence, they also needed to have good opportunities and a good position. This was the fundamental reason why other officials were willing to lay their hands on their colleagues. Only when others fell would you have a chance to rise to the top, right? However, Zhu Qiyu didn't know that it was too early to use the imperial censor to touch Yang Qindong. On the contrary, it was equivalent to doing him a great favor. After obtaining Zhu Qiyu's permission, Jin Ying left excitedly. She quickly found the Minister of Revenue Jin Lian, the Minister of War Yiming, the Minister of Works Shi Pu, and the Marquis of Wuqing Shi Heng. After they learned of the Emperor's intentions, they each used their own power to have the officials who listened to them write impeachment memorials. The busiest of them all was the Imperial Censor of the right, Chen Yi. With the position of Imperial Censor of the left vacant, Chen Yi naturally became the head of the Imperial Censor. He managed the specific matters of the Imperial Censor's memorials. That very afternoon, more than 70% of the Imperial Censors submitted memorials to the throne. They were all talking about the same thing. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage had destroyed the Japanese diplomatic mission's encampment, tore down the courtyard door, and whipped the envoy. The imperial censors unanimously agreed that the Great Ming Dynasty was a great country and should have an incomparably broad mind and magnanimity. Using force to suppress the envoys of other countries like this was really unacceptable. It was a loss of face for the Great Ming Dynasty and should be severely punished. With so many imperial censors participating at the same time, the news quickly spread to the ears of all the ministers. In the Hu estate, as Yang Qindong's father-in-law, Hu Zhangning immediately went to his father's study when he heard the news. There, he met with the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. Hu Xiao naturally knew what his son meant by rashly barging in. You're already so old, yet you're still so rash. Don't you know what it means to act when something big happens? Yes, father. I was wrong, but with so many people impeaching Qindong, I'm really worried that something bad will happen. Hu Zhangning first admitted his mistake, then expressed his worries in one breath. He was both satisfied and apprehensive that his daughter had married Yang Qindong. He was satisfied because there were no outstanding young talents like Yang Qindong. It was indeed a great blessing for his daughter to be able to marry him. However, at the same time, it was precisely because Yang Qindong was too young and his contributions were too great that this father-in-law had always been worried about him. It was said that the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. However, why didn't his son-in-law know how to restrain himself? Wasn't it good for him to obediently stay in the Yang family manor with money and power? Why did he have to come out and cause trouble and stick his foot in everything? Now, he was so daring that he even dared to hit the envoys of other countries. It was no wonder that the imperial censors would jointly impeach him. What will happen? Do you think that your son-in-law is you? Don't you use your brain when something happens? Don't you have any composure? Hu Xiao said calmly. He held the position of minister and had been an official for many years. As an old court official, he had long been used to big storms and big waves. He could see through the matter in front of him at a glance. Why didn't anyone say anything about what happened yesterday during the morning assembly? Why did it take an entire day for there to be any movement? If someone said that there was no problem at all, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Thinking about it, there was also news that Su Youzhen's interrogation of Li Wenxiao had yielded results. Hu Shao figured everything out. This was clearly a diversion method, and the target could only be Yang Qindong. Since it was a diversion method, there was no clear target. If that was the case, what was there to worry about? It was nothing more than when the matter blew up, Yang Qindong would stand out and apologize, and the matter would be settled. Of course, it wasn't that there wasn't any worry. That was whether this grandson-in-law, Yang Qindong, would be able to lower his noble head when he was young and successful. That was what he was worried about. That's enough. This time, Qindong was only implicated. If you're worried, go to the Yang village and tell him that it was me who said that he should lower his head when he should. It's not a big deal and he won't lose a piece of meat. Hu Shao felt that he still needed to remind Yang Qindong, so he gave the task to his son. Oh, I understand, father. Although Hu Zhongning didn't understand what was going on, he didn't say much, but since he had said so, it shouldn't be a big deal. So, after agreeing, he prepared his horse and went straight to the Yang village. In the study of the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, who was sitting there, let out a long sigh. With his connections, he already knew that Li Wenxiao had admitted to everything and even exposed Changguan Yushiriwe. Following that, he heard that the imperial censors had jointly impeached Yang Qindong. Regarding this, he made a difficult choice. This matter was clearly caused by his grandson Wang Si. Logically speaking, he should be on Yang Qindong's side. Faced with the imperial censors' impeachment, he only needed to expose Li Wenxiao's matter during the morning court session tomorrow. He believed that everyone's attention would quickly be diverted. That way, the Duke of Loyalty should be fine. However, he would have to face the Emperor's dissatisfaction, and even Yu Shiryue's faction would target him. If he angered the Emperor, he would be walking on thin ice when doing things in the future. If he wasn't careful, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. On the other hand, if he didn't do anything for his own position, Yang Qindong would be in a lot of trouble. At the very least, he had to publicly apologize. Afterwards, he would have to face the punishment of the acting emperor. As for how far he would go, he couldn't guess. One was doing nothing for his own sake, while the other was putting himself in danger for the sake of returning a favor. At this moment, Wang Ji really didn't know what to do. The world was bustling with activity for profit, and the world was bustling with activity for profit. Wang Ji had been an official for many years. Naturally, he understood the principle of putting himself out of harm's way. However, it wasn't as if he didn't know how to repay kindness. In the end, he made a painful decision. That was, he informed all the imperial censors who were on good terms with him to quietly observe the situation and not participate in this matter. However, at the same time, he didn't reveal that he had evidence against Li Wenxiao and that Li Wenxiao had accused Yu Shiryue. In short, he didn't help either side and had no intention of participating in this matter. Not helping either side was, in fact, helping Yang Qindong. After all, compared to the imperial power and the four great ministers, it was very rare for Wang Ji to be neutral. When Yang Qindong learned of Wang Ji's performance, he nodded in satisfaction in his bedroom. This was a good start. If he continued to maintain this, he was confident that one day, this Minister of Personnel would be of use to him. As for the impeachment of the imperial censors, Yang Qindong didn't care about them at all. Furthermore, it wouldn't be long before he used his actions to give these people a hard slap in the face. Deputy Imperial Censor Dong Chunhua of the Imperial Censorate, a rank 3 official. Seeing that there was no imperial censor of the left in the Imperial Censorate, his desire to rise was very strong. Furthermore, he had enough qualifications. All he lacked now was an opportunity. He took out a lot of his belongings to exchange for banknotes from the Yang family bank and gave them to eunuch Jining. He who had paved the way was just waiting for an opportunity. And now the opportunity had appeared. Such a large-scale impeachment of a duke was incited by the emperor. The four great ministers and the military's governor Shiheng were also involved. If he performed well, he would be able to rise to a higher position in the future. Coincidentally, the imperial censor of the right, Chen Yi, didn't seem to be very enthusiastic about this matter. Dong Chunhua, who saw the opportunity, took the initiative to stand up and integrate the memorials with the imperial censors. He became the happiest and most enthusiastic person in this incident. During the morning court session the next day, a group of more than 30 imperial censors, led by Dong Chunhua, stood up at the same time in the imperial palace's conference hall. They said that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, Yang Chendong, was extremely daring. He beat up the Japanese envoy and destroyed the Great Ming's image. Dozens of people said similar crimes one after another. It really felt like everyone was kicking a man who was down. The intensity of their words and sharpness of their words made it seem like Yang Chendong was the biggest scourge. If he wasn't eliminated, the entire Great Ming would feel uneasy. Zhu Qiyu, the head of defense, sat high on the throne. His expression seemed calm, but he was very happy in his heart. Even if Yang Chendong had made a lot of contributions, when the wind changed slightly, the feeling that a storm was coming could easily knock down any subject. All along, Zhu Qiyu didn't say anything, but in his heart, he was afraid of this subject whose contributions were so high that they could shake the emperor. This kind of feeling made him unable to eat or drink. It also made him unable to grasp the hearts of his subjects. He wasn't sure how many of his subjects would stand on his side if he really targeted him. If he really became a loner, then this emperor wouldn't be far from stepping down. Chapter 278. But today it seemed that the result was much better than he had imagined. There were actually so many officials who opposed Yang Chendong. Looking at it this way, once the time was right, eliminating this person should not cause too much opposition and instability in the court. Under Zhu Qiyu's gaze, with a hint of encouragement, the imperial censors of the imperial censorate tried their best to perform. In particular, the left deputy imperial censor, Dong Chunhua, did his best to perform. From his words, the Duke of Loyalty seemed to have become a malignant tumor and the embodiment of evil. If this person was not punished, the entire Great Ming dynasty would not be able to see the light and hope. Not only did the memorial belittle Yang Chendong, but it also emphasized the friendly relationship between the Ming dynasty and Japan. Any officials who played a bad role in the diplomatic relations between the two countries should be punished severely. In order to express the goodwill of the Great Ming dynasty, the former Japanese envoy, Aoki Yuki, should be released from prison. Dong Chunhua's proposal quickly received the support of more officials. It must be said that Kimura Yoshida had spent a lot of money during this period of time, and most of the people who stood up to speak were people who had received benefits before. Naturally, this time they would do their best to perform. The situation in the court was one-sided, and the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, was described as a piece of rat shit. It seemed that, because of his appearance, the Great Ming dynasty had been humiliated. At this moment, most people seemed to have selectively forgotten that when Walla's army attacked the city, he was the one who stepped forward to repel the enemy. Hu Shao did not speak, and Wang Zhi did not speak. However, in such a violent situation, the silence of the same minister did not play much of a role. On the contrary, some people thought that they were afraid and wanted to protect themselves. Following that, the accusations became even more severe. Some people even suggested that the Duke of Loyalty should publicly apologize and be expelled from his fief. A public apology was equivalent to Yang Chendong admitting that he had done something wrong. As a result, the prestige and popularity that he had accumulated over many days would be greatly affected. It would even have a great impact on the reputation of Yang Chendong's bank. If this was really done, the efforts of more than a year would be completely ruined at this moment. From this, it could be seen how vicious the person who made this suggestion was. Expelling Yang Chendong back to the fief of Jianing Prefecture in Fujian was tantamount to kicking him out from the center of power. If this was really the case, it would be difficult for him to make a comeback. Perhaps in the future, he could only be an idle guogong for the rest of his life. It would be difficult for him to meddle in the specific affairs and future direction of the Great Ming dynasty. The two suggestions were like two sharp swords, pointing straight at Yang Chendong's ribs. If all of them passed, the consequences could be imagined. Your Majesty, please reconsider. After all, the Duke of Loyalty had saved Ingzong. If he were to leave now, it would be pushing him away, and the consequences would be unimaginable. Upon hearing that his grandson-in-law was to leave the capital, the silent Hu Shao finally couldn't hold himself back any longer and stepped forward in shock. For the sake of his grandson-in-law, he had even brought up Zhu Qizhen's name in public. This in itself was somewhat disrespectful. But he was still an old official of several dynasties and an important official used by Ingzong, so it was reasonable for him to say such a thing. "That's right. Your Majesty, please reconsider." Minister of Personnel Wang Ji seconded in his shock. If he admitted his wrongs today, he could use other matters tomorrow to regain his face. But once he left this place, it would be very difficult for him to make a comeback, and he truly might not be able to recover from this setback. When Zhu Qiu heard the suggestions of his subordinates, he truly was somewhat tempted. If Yang Qindong really could leave the capital, he would have a chance to slowly turn the industries he had left behind into his own, and he might even be able to establish a business relationship with the mercenaries. He remembered that when Jining had represented him to discuss business with the mercenary commander Lung Feng, the other party had said that as long as the Duke of Loyalty remained in the capital, his rights would not be transferred. But what if he was allowed to leave? Could it be that his chance had come? If he could replace Yang Qindong, then whether it was in business or military, he would be able to rise to a higher level. How could he not be tempted? However, as soon as Hu Shao and Wang Ji stepped forward, this desire was immediately extinguished. It was for no other reason than the fact that the Great Ming was no longer a Great Ming where power was concentrated in the hands of the emperor alone. Now, there was the Southern Ming, and his imperial brother Zhu Qizhen was stationed in Nanjing. If he chased away Yang Qindong, it would undoubtedly be the same as chasing him into his imperial brother's embrace. Once he obtained this person, who knew what heaven-shaking things his imperial brother would do? While his heart trembled, Zhu Qiu didn't dare to let Yang Qindong leave without sufficient assurance. Thus, he decisively made his decision. Enough! Although the Duke of Loyalty was wrong, he shouldn't have left. How about this, Minister Dong, go to Yangjia village and have him publicly apologize to appease the anger of the Japanese envoy. Also, in order to show the sincerity of our Great Ming's relationship with our neighbors, the Japanese envoy, Aoki Yuki, who made a serious mistake before, can also be released. However, we must remind him to restrain his actions in the future. This is the Great Ming, and he can't kill indiscriminately. In the end, the emperor didn't have the intention to chase away Yang Qindong. He chose to take a step back. It was inevitable that some of the officials would be disappointed, but in any case, this time they could force Yang Qindong to publicly apologize. With this beginning, they could slowly make plans in the future. Breaking his fortress wouldn't be easy. Your Majesty is wise. All the officials seemed to have thought of this point and immediately praised Zhu Qiu's wisdom. When the court was dismissed, the deputy imperial censor of the Ministry of Justice, Dong Chunhua, went straight to Yangjia village with great fanfare. Dong Chunhua's face was flushed red. At this time, he was extremely excited. There were so many officials, and even Shangguan Qinyi was in the imperial censorate. But in the end, the matter was still handed over to him. Didn't this already show the emperor's trust in him, and that he was about to be put in an important position? When he thought about how he could finally see the ladder to becoming a second-rank official, and how he could bring glory to his ancestors, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but smile. "Official Dong, please wait." Just as Dong Chunhua left the palace and was about to walk to the main street, a shout came from behind him. When he turned around, his face showed a flattered expression. So it's Official E, Official U, Official Jin, and Official Sure. Dong Chunhua couldn't help but show this kind of expression. Suddenly, 4 officials came together for him. How could this kind of scene not make people excited? In the field of government, the hierarchy had always been very strict. What kind of officials could walk together and what kind of officials could talk and laugh together, all of these were very particular. For example, a second-rank official absolutely wouldn't condescend to talk and laugh with someone whose rank was lower than his. That would only be degrading his status. But now, for second-rank officials, especially under the premise that the cabinet had already disappeared, the status of these 4 people could only be higher than before. How could Dong Chunhua, who was only a third-rank official, not be excited when they all appeared together? The 4 officials walked in front of Dong Chunhua. First, they looked at him with a gaze of praise. Their gazes clearly revealed the fact that it wouldn't be long before everyone was on equal footing. It was because they saw the effort this person had put in this matter and the reward he might receive that they condescended to come here. Of the 4 officials, the first to speak was the Minister of War Yi Ming. Perhaps because Yang Qindong's appearance had stolen too much of the Ministry of War's limelight, he was the one who hated the Duke of Loyalty to the bones the most. Official Dong, are you preparing to go to Yang Village to announce the decree? Dong Chunhua bowed and said, Minister Yi's words are correct. Oh, but what does official Dong plan to do? Yi Ming asked with an expression that said he had already guessed it. Of course, it's to announce the emperor's decree. Dong Chunhua had an expression that said, You know what I'm talking about. But after he finished speaking, he noticed that Yi Ming and the other 3 officials all had serious expressions. He suddenly thought of something. What? Do the 4 officials believe that the Duke of Loyalty would dare to defy the decree? As soon as he said this, he thought of Yang Qindong's young and promising performance, as well as his past actions. His expression immediately became flustered. Others wouldn't dare to defy the decree, but this Duke of Loyalty who had made great contributions was not easy to deal with. That might not be the case. Yi Ming shook his head lightly. Although Yang Qindong was bold and reckless, in the end, he was still an official of the great Ming dynasty. He might not really dare to do something as reprehensible as defying the decree. Of course, if he really dared to do so, he would be taking the initiative to give others a handle. As such, there were thousands of ways to deal with him. Seeing that Yi Ming had rejected the idea, Dong Chunhua's heart relaxed. At the same time, he couldn't help but ask, since he doesn't dare to defy the decree, what else is there to worry about? Is it worth the 4 officials to remind this official? We're here to remind you. I don't know if official Dong has thought about it, but since you want the Duke of Loyalty to admit his mistake, of course, the bigger the commotion, the better. However, the court assembly has just ended, and presumably, the news hasn't spread yet. If you ask him to admit his mistake so early, wouldn't it benefit some people? The Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian, had a smile on his face as if he was very familiar with Dong Chunhua. Expand the influence. As someone who could become the deputy imperial censor of the left, he was naturally incomparably intelligent. After this reminder, he quickly thought of something, and then his eyes revealed a look of surprise. He only wanted to embarrass Yang Qindong, and it was a good opportunity to show off his strength. However, he forgot that even if the other party admitted his mistake, it was still possible to make a fuss about it. How was he going to admit his mistake? The degree of recognition and the kind of impact it would have could be manipulated artificially. Thinking of this, Dong Chunhua couldn't help but sigh at the experience of the 4 officials. His face also showed an expression of humility as he asked for advice. This official is slow-witted, please enlighten me. Seeing that Dong Chunhua understood everyone's intentions, Yi Ming and the other 3 laughed and then said, Since official Dong has said so, if we don't give a suggestion, wouldn't it be unreasonable? How about this, if we cause a lot of trouble, why don't we find a place to arrange it and make a good plan? This suggestion quickly received a response from everyone. Soon, the 5 of them brought the servants of the residence out of the imperial city, chatting and laughing, and went straight to a nearby restaurant. Chapter 279. Yang Family Academy. Yang Qindong had just taught everyone a physics lesson as a teacher. In this lesson, Yang Qindong vividly illustrated the importance of physics and explained some things that no one could understand before. He focused on the topic of gravity. This lesson could be said to have opened everyone's eyes. From Yang Qindong's explanation, everyone finally understood that not only did people do things according to a pattern, but everything in the world was the same. It was just that they were not good at discovering it before. Under the admiring gazes of dozens of students, Yang Qindong walked out of the classroom. Outside, Tiger's Mane had been waiting anxiously for a long time. First, Yang Qindong took the handkerchief and wiped off the chalk foam one by one. Then, he asked calmly, "What's wrong? What's the conclusion of the imperial court?" Or did the eunuch come to my Yang family manor? From these words, it could be seen that Yang Chendong had predicted the development of the matter, and it was quite accurate. In response to the young master's question, the conclusion has been reached. More than 70% of the imperial censors participated in the impeachment of the young master. In the entire imperial court, except for Minister Hu, Minister Wang, and a few others, the rest of the people criticized the young master. In the end, the acting emperor ordered the young master to publicly apologize in order to obtain the forgiveness of the Japanese ambassador. Tiger's mane carefully told Yang Chendong the news he had just received. After he finished, he looked nervously at the young master and prepared for him to be angry. To Tiger's mane's disappointment, Yang Chendong did not seem to be very agitated. On the contrary, his expression was incomparably calm, as if he had already expected the result. After listening to Tiger's mane's retelling of everything, he sighed. Is this the so-called tolerance? The tolerance that Yang Chendong spoke of was naturally not referring to the attitude of the Daizong emperor and the courtiers towards him. Although he hadn't done many things, which one of them wasn't earth-shattering. By offering potatoes, he solved the problem of food and clothing for the common people, making it rare for people to starve to death due to lack of food. He saved Yingzong and saved the face of the great Ming dynasty. He defended the capital, defeated the Walla, and maintained the stability of the capital and even the entire great Ming dynasty, giving it time to continue developing. But when all of this was over, what did he get in return? Jealousy, dissatisfaction, and resentment all emerged from his bones. How could this be the tolerance that should be given to a meritorious minister? To his own people, he would step on them whenever he could. On the contrary, to outsiders, he would show a tolerant and magnanimous side. The Japanese envoy, Kimura Yoshida, only said that if the relationship between the two countries deteriorated, Japan would invade the border by sea. Just this simple sentence without any actual action. Is the great Ming dynasty going to ask their great hero to admit his mistake? How chilling would this be? Don't they know that doing this will only hurt their loved ones and make their enemies happy? Don't they know that doing this will only make the common people lose confidence in the great Ming dynasty? Don't they know that the consequences of doing this will lead to a major event, and no one will dare to stand up and fight for the great Ming dynasty? Don't they know? At this moment, Yang Chendong's heart was as uncomfortable as a river and a sea. He understood the history of the later generations and knew that when the Han people were strong, they were always willing to show their magnanimous side, but often when they were weak, it was time for them to pay a heavy price. This price caused some dynasties to change, some caused the common people to be displaced, some caused the civilization to be seriously damaged, and some caused many Chinese treasures to fall into the arms of the motherland, forever unable to return to the embrace of the motherland. And all of these developments formed history, which was also a history of blood and tears. People said that if one looked at history as a mirror, one could know the rise and fall, and if one looked at people as a mirror, one could see the gains and losses. It was precisely because he understood too much about these things that Yang Chendong decided to change everything, and the idea of the great Ming dynasty occupied an extremely important position. Only after understanding history did he know what kind of people could not be forgiven and forgiven. Japan was the most typical example. This small and weak race originated from the end of the Qin dynasty, and it could even be said that they were of the same origin as the Han people. This caused many of their habits and even their language to be similar. However, perhaps because of their geographical location, they felt a sense of urgency and nervousness from the moment they were born. It was this kind of pressure that allowed them to exert strength that was several times greater than their own. This was also a side branch of the Han people. Whenever the Han people were weak, they would send troops and take advantage of them before leaving. On the other hand, when the Han people were strong, they would wag their tails and beg for mercy, showing their weak and pitiful side. This method was repeated over and over again, and it worked every time. However, it was able to make the Han people tolerate it time and time again, causing them to be in a situation where it was too late to regret it. It was precisely because he understood too much that Yang Chendong had a different feeling. Facing a side branch of the Han people that could turn hostile and bite you at any time, The best way to deal with it was not to be magnanimous and tolerate it, nor was it to be magnanimous and change it. Instead, it was to replace it, assimilate it, and devour it. Only then would it be over. In other words, the so-called tolerance would not work on the Japanese. On the contrary, they should directly devour them, and then change them from the bottom of their hearts, until they faced their own bloodline and origin, and let them know that they were also part of the Han people. Only then could it be considered a complete solution. Of course, anyone could have such thoughts, but more importantly, whether or not they could do it was the most important. However, Yang Chandong, who possessed the Okura, already had the ability to do so. With the advanced weapons in the Okura, in the world at that time, there was no country, race, or individual that could resist technology that was hundreds of years more advanced than theirs. Since the conditions in terms of hardware had been met, the next step was to create an opportunity and decisively make a move. Inform Commander Gao Xiong with the fastest speed possible, and quickly get into position and carry out the original plan. Yang Chandong, who had made a decision in his heart, decisively made a decision. Then, he looked in the direction of the capital and said, "Blindly tolerating is not the best way to deal with some people. There should be no kindness in the first place. It's a pity that ignorant people like you can't understand this. Since that's the case, then let me teach you a lesson. An expert in civil war and amateur in foreign war. This was a bad habit in many dynasties, just like Dong Chunhua and the others. When the Walla army approached the capital, they were helpless. Not only that, they were thinking about how to escape and how to leave safely. However, when facing the great hero who defeated the Walla, they were very smart and used many methods to frame him. It was as if they had suddenly become a different person, very smart, and used many methods. Under the planning of Dong Chunhua, Yiming, and the other ministers of the 4 departments, the Japanese envoy Kimura Yoshida first appeared on the busiest street in the capital. He told everyone about the friendship between Japan and the Great Ming, and said that this friendship could have lasted for tens of thousands of years. However, it was precisely because of the rashness of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage that this friendship had been destroyed. And the consequence was very likely to cause a war between the 2 countries, which would affect the lives of the people. Not only would the quality of life decline, but many people would also die. This was an important matter that concerned the ordinary people. At the same time, another saying spread through the streets and alleys of the capital. That was the young Dong Shuai, the young war god, the young Duke of Loyalty and Courage had become arrogant. He did not care about the peaceful life of the people at all and advocated to send troops to Japan. This kind of disregard for the feelings of a friendly country and the life and death of the people was just to show his talent in leading troops to war. This kind of behavior that only cared about himself and did not care about others quickly attracted the disgust of many people who did not know the truth. Yang Chandong, who was originally very popular among the people, suffered a big blow in his image. At this time, there were even business groups that added insult to injury. They suddenly increased the price of their goods, but to outsiders it was all because of Yang Chandong's proposal to pay the taxes. The taxes were heavy, and for their own interests, the merchants could only raise the price of their goods. In the end, the people who paid for all of this were the ordinary people. All kinds of things sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, causing the hearts of some people who originally supported Yang Chandong to be greatly shaken. Some people who did not know the truth and did not know the truth directly removed the longevity tablets of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage from their homes. Some people even burned the tablets to vent their hatred. These were the ordinary people. In the era when information was not developed, they were easily swayed by all kinds of false information and public opinion. Perhaps it was the kindness in their bones that made it easier for them to be deceived by others. It was precisely because they had kindness in their hearts that they thought others would be as kind as they were, that they would not think of others as evil, and that made it easier for others to take advantage of them. The public opinion changed greatly. The direct result was that fewer people went to the Yang clan's bank to deposit money, and more people went to withdraw money. Fewer people went to the immortal abode to eat. It had originally been difficult to find a single seat, but now it was completely deserted. Fewer people went to the Heavens Beyond Trading Company to pick up their goods. There were a few merchants who wanted to take advantage of this situation to make a fortune, but they were often attacked not long after picking up their goods. The direct result was that their goods were stolen, and they suffered heavy losses. Once these things were reported to the authorities, they would not be known, and no one would bother to ask about them. The Security Bureau recorded everything that happened every day and sent it to Yang Chendong. In the study, the amount of information written on paper increased with each passing day, piling up high. It was worrisome. Chapter 280. Madame Snow and Madame Snow had also returned to the Yang clan manor because of the lack of activity in the immortal abode. This was also Yang Chendong's idea. Even though they were only losing money, he didn't dare guarantee that there wouldn't be people who would take the risk and suddenly attack his family. Tung Shan had led the 100 soldiers of 3rd Company to Walla to open up a trade route, and had yet to return. In the capital, Yang Chendong didn't have a lot of manpower at his disposal. He couldn't take care of everything, so shrinking his forces was inevitable. Young Master, another 3 million taels of silver was withdrawn from the bank today. It's already been like this for 5 days. If this continues, I'm afraid that we won't have enough gold left in the treasury, Tiger's Mane said, his forehead drenched in sweat. Originally, the Yang clan bank had prepared 1 million taels of gold to protect the interests of its depositors. Based on the ratio of 1 to 10, it was enough to pay out 10 million taels of gold. If nothing major happened, it would be enough. But what no one expected was that the sudden situation would cause the depositors to withdraw large amounts of money. Of the 1 million taels of gold they had prepared, less than 100,000 taels remained. If someone withdrew another 1 million taels of silver tomorrow, they really might not be able to pay out the money. The bank still has 500,000 taels of gold in the cellar. You can use it first. Yang Chendong didn't appear as anxious as Tiger's Mane. He was still as calm as ever, giving off the feeling that everything was within his expectations. Yes, Tiger's Mane nodded, but then he said timidly, but enough, there's no need to say anything more. I know what you mean, but you can relax. The crisis will be resolved in a few days. As the head of the family, Yang Chendong had a lot of data in his mind. For example, during this period of time, the Yang family's bank had deposited a total of 30 million taels of silver, of which he had loaned out nearly 10 million taels of silver to those merchants who were trustworthy. Of the remaining 20 million taels, 9 million had already been withdrawn. However, it had only been 5 days. If the situation continued to develop, if 30 million customers came to withdraw their money, the Yang family bank would face a crisis of bankruptcy. It was precisely because Tiger's Mane knew about this that he wanted to see if he could urge the merchants to repay their loans as soon as possible. In this way, with 10 million yuan as capital plus the 5 million yuan in the Yang family manor, it should be enough to deal with the crisis of people withdrawing their money. Speaking of which, Tiger's Mane wasn't wrong. According to the information from the Security Bureau, there were many big businessmen involved in this broadcasting incident, including many businessmen who had taken loans from the Yang family bank. They borrowed money from the Yang family's bank on one hand and ran a bank run on the Yang family's bank on the other hand, all because they didn't want to return the money. Just think about it, if the bank was gone, would the loan still need to be returned? Because of this, there were still many businessmen coming to the Yang family's bank to talk about loans. However, in the current situation, as the manager, Yang Fu didn't dare to agree. Of course, he rejected them one by one. Because of this incident, many businessmen talked about the Yang family bank in public and said that it wasn't good. It gave people the feeling that the bank was already unable to make ends meet. After the actions of the businessmen were investigated by the Security Bureau, they reported it to the 6th Young Master. As the leader of the action team, Tiger's Mane, who was also the leader of the Langya Special Forces, even made a detailed battle plan. However, when the matter was reported to Yang Chendong, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There wasn't the slightest response. This was why Tiger's Mane said, but, however, he was still interrupted by Yang Chendong in time. Okay, let's move the gold away first to solve the problem. Tiger's Mane had followed Yang Chendong for many years and knew the temper of the young master. Once a decision was made, There was no room for discussion. He cupped his fist and left the study room. After Tiger's mane left, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on a map hanging on the wall. It was the map of the Ming dynasty's maritime border, and the Tianjin Guard was highlighted with a red pen. It seemed to indicate that something was going to happen there. Dong Mansion, deputy censor of the left, Dong Chunhua, was leaning back in his chair with a smug look on his face. Standing in front of him was a butler in a long robe. At this moment, he was talking non-stop about what he had seen and heard. Master, at noon today, the Yang family manor transported 500,000 taels of gold and sent it to the Yang family bank in the city. After the housekeeper finished explaining the last matter, he stood respectfully, looking as if he wanted to listen to his teachings. Oh, isn't that the same as taking out 5 million taels of silver? This loyal duke is really rich. Dong Chunhua's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a trace of a proud smile in his eyes as he continued. Very good. The richer he is, the greater my profits will be. Let's get ready. Tomorrow morning I will make a trip to Yang village. The 5 days of preparation made Yang Chundong lose a lot of reputation and wealth. It was time for him to make a move. Once this heavy hammer was smashed, once the loyal eunuch apologized and admitted his mistake, his reputation would be ruined. Once this matter was spread out, his reputation would plummet. At that time, there would definitely be many people who would kick him while he was down. At that time, the loyal eunuch would inevitably lose both his life and wealth. In order to reward himself, it would be natural for him to go one step further in his official career. Dong Chunhua was very excited and even a little excited. He had begun to look forward to a new day. He wanted to see Yang Qindong's appearance when he made a fool of himself. On the contrary, in the palace, eunuch Jining, who had been watching all this from behind the scenes, frowned slightly. He was unable to feel happy. It had been 5 days since the court assembly. Although it seemed that Dong Chunhua, who had given the emperor's orders, was advancing step by step and making the situation look good for him, for some reason, he did not feel happy at all. Why isn't he fighting back? What is he waiting for? Jining muttered to himself in his room. After dealing with Yang Chundong several times, he had already experienced the power of his opponent. He did not believe that it would be so easy to defeat the youngest duke. If that was the case, the emperor would not be so afraid. He would not be a mere incompetent official without taking any action. No, he must have a backup plan. At least until now, that mysterious power has not appeared. Pouring a mouthful of tea into his mouth, Jin Ying's expression became even more uneasy. He would not forget that Yang Chundong had reminded all the eunuchs not to call themselves eunuchs. In the end, that night 14 eunuchs had been threatened to varying degrees. It was also after that incident that Jining no longer dared to underestimate Yang Chundong. Eunuch, what did you say? Are you going to attack? In the corner of the room stood the commander of the brocade guards, Lu Gue. Because Jin Ying's voice had been too soft, he had not heard it clearly. However, he knew that Jining had spoken and thought that it was an order. No, don't attack first. Wait and see. Also, you must restrain your subordinates. Without my orders, they must not attack as they please. Jining shook his head. His intuition told him that Yang Chundong would not simply wait for death. Sometimes, not doing anything did not mean that he would not do anything. On the contrary, when someone like this retaliated, it would be a thunderous blow. Jining did not want to be the one struck by lightning. Yang family manor. It was already late at night. A guest suddenly appeared before the eyes of the hidden sentries. Immediately, a few silenced Type 95 guns were aimed at the incoming shadow. When the shadow came closer and closer and was already within 60 meters of the sentries, a voice suddenly rang out from the darkness. Password. Huang, reply. The shadow was first shocked to the spot by the sudden shout, but then he replied in a familiar voice. River. The voice rang out again in the darkness. Then it returned to silence. The person who had come knew today's password. He must be a spy from the security bureau. Immediately, the person was let into the outskirts of the Yang family manor. Then, Yang Si, who was in charge of the night watch, received him. Not long after, Yang Si's figure appeared in the inner manor. After a while, the light in Yang Chundong's study was lit. When Yang Chundong put on a coat and entered the study, Yang Si knelt on the ground and said, "Young master, the security bureau has just sent news. The people they sent have already received Commander Tung Shan's group. They have already completed their first trade with the Vala Empire. This time, they brought back a total of 3 million silvers. Many of the Vala Empire's merchants also came along with them. They also brought a lot of money with them, wanting to buy our goods from beyond heavens. Now, their group is only a day away from the capital. If there are no accidents, they will enter the city tomorrow afternoon when the city gates close." "Oh, so fast?" Hearing this news, Yang Chundong's face was very excited. According to the previous estimate, Tung Shan and Bai Peng's group would need at least half a month to return. After all, the transportation at that time was not very developed. In addition, Great Ming and Walla were enemies. There were even some areas that did not have roads and needed to be reopened. Now that they had returned so quickly, it could be seen that Tung Shan and the others had put in a lot of effort. Of course, the reason why they returned so quickly was because Tung Shan was worried about the safety of the sixth young master. But no matter what, they had returned with a large amount of gold and silver and many customers. They had solved the crisis of the Yang family bank. This allowed Yang Chundong to do things with less worry. Very good, they came back at the right time. How about this, Yang Si? Let the security bureau go into the city and inform Yang Fu. Tell him that we can agree to the loans of those merchants. However, we have to raise the interest by 3%. Humph! Didn't they want to see this young master fall and take advantage of it? Now, I want to let these people know that there is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Yang Chundong's eyes shone as he spoke. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.